Gentlemen, members, officers, welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee of Woking Borough Council, Wednesday, September the 8th, 2021. This is a hybrid meeting of the committee. It's hybrid because some people are present with me in the chamber here, while others are participating remotely using Microsoft Teams. The meeting also is being live streamed on YouTube. I'm Councillor Chris Bowring and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee, most of whom are in the chamber, consists of 11 elected members, borough councillors, and are supported by a variety of officers. There are representatives on the committee from all four political groups on the council. We have one officer physically present alongside me, Callum Wernham, who is Democratic Services, Democratic and Electoral Services Specialist and clerk to the committee. Remotely, we have, in no particular order, Lindsay Jennings, who is a senior solicitor, and she will advise us on legal matters. Chris Easton is head of transport, drainage and compliance. Connor Corrigan is service manager for planning and delivery. And Justin Turvey, who is the operational manager for development management. And the case officers for each of the applications who are virtual as well. This is a quasi-judicial meeting with formal procedures which must be adhered to. For each application, firstly, the planning officer will present the application. Then only those who have pre-registered to speak will be called to address the committee. No one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors, supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions, interrupt, or disrupt the meeting. But everyone has had a chance to comment on the applications through the normal consultation process. Please note that there is a strict time limit for speakers of 3 minutes for each of the four categories, which are town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak for. But above all, please stay within your time limit. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate the application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to try to reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with the recommendation from the presenting case officer. Finally, it is the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning applications placed before it, using national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the Independent Planning Inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alterations to applications, nor to consider whether they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, and if there are alternative uses of the land, or see whether more suitable uses of the land could be used. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on only when you're speaking, and for everyone, please make sure your microphone is on when speaking and off at other times. Thank you. So we move to the agenda, and the first item is apologies for absence. I think we have Vice Chairman, Councillor Angus Ross and Councillor Bill Soane. Correct, Chairman. And the second item is minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any comments that the minutes are in the agenda? Members, do you have any comments on the minutes of the last meeting? Seeing one hands up, so I will sign the minutes as a true record. We move on to declarations of interest, members. Any declarations? Yes, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I declare an interest in application 212209 5 Shepherds Avenue. I sat on the early Town Council Planning Committee that made a recommendation on this application, but feel able to approach tonight's discussion with an open mind, and so would like to take part in that discussion and any vote.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else? Not. Are there any applications to be deferred and withdrawn? Justin, I don't think there are other.
None, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to the first application, which is number 211772, land at Winnersh Farm on page 21. And the case officer is Sophie Morris. Good evening, Sophie. think you're muted.
Apologies. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, if you don't mind just bearing with me one moment. Has that come up yet? No.
We haven't got it yet.
Sorry, bear with me. I think I'm almost there. Can you see that now? Oh, right, I can see that that's come up.
Yes, we got that. Can you make it
Okay.
full screen?
Yeah.
Please? Thank you.
Okay,
Right.
thank you, Chair. So the first application this evening seeks full planning permission for the proposed construction of a new 150-place special educational needs school with associated access, parking and landscaping. The application site, shown indicatively by the oval shape on the slide, relates to land located off Woodward Close in Winnersh, which forms part of an area of agricultural land known as Winnersh Farm. The site is located within the countryside outside of the Winnersh settlement boundary and is not currently an allocated site. So this slide shows the red line boundary of the application site, and to the west of the site boundary are the playing fields and school building of Wheatfield Primary School. The immediate surroundings to the north and east of the site comprise agricultural land. To the south of the site is the Royal British Legion Club and the Winnersh allotments, and beyond this, the M4. The allotments are currently accessed via a tree-lined track located off Woodward Close, part of which runs across the application site, as indicated by the yellow line on the above slide. These photos show existing views looking east across the main part of the site and towards the north and west boundaries, where the existing fence line of the adjacent Wheatfield Primary School can be seen just here. This is a view looking back across the main part of the site towards the rear of the Wheatfield Primary School, along with the existing access gate to the allotments positioned next to the Wheatfield Primary School entrance on Woodward Close, just here. Turning to the proposals themselves. The principle of the proposed developments on this site is considered to be acceptable when assessed against exceptions criteria 6 of policy CP11. In this case, the identified pressing need for an SEN school provision and the challenges faced with finding a suitable site for this purpose has resulted in the application site being selected by the Department for Education to meet the SEN school provision requirements. As mentioned within the accompanying report, other options such as extending existing provision have been explored, but for varying reasons were not considered suitable to acceptably accommodate the needs of the provision required, the demands for which continue to rise. In terms of the proposed layout, the school building would be located on the parcel of land to the north of the existing allotment access track, with the access proposed off Woodward Close. This would be located between the existing allotments access track and the Royal British Legion Club. As a result of the formation of this new access and the proposed location of the school building, the existing track to the allotments would no longer be used, and instead access to the allotments would also be obtained via the school access road, which would connect with the allotments car park. As referred to in the report, a condition is recommended to ensure continued access to the allotments will be provided throughout the build programme. Parking to serve the school would be provided across 2 parking areas, one located at the front of the school building, which would have a one-way system, with a further parking area provided on the southern side of the access road. The parking provisions serving the development are considered acceptable, and through the implementation of a travel plan, staff will be encouraged to use alternative sustainable means of travel to the site rather than by single occupancy car trips. The proposals have also not raised concerns by Highways in relation to impacts upon the surrounding highway network. The external arrangement of the proposals provide dedicated hard informal outdoor playground areas for the primary and secondary classes to the north of the school building, and beyond these are soft outdoor PE areas and a scooter track. A multi-use games area is also proposed to the west of the school building, along with a playing pitch. To the front of the building, the external area provides further hard informal and social spaces. As can be seen on the above slide, the proposals would result in some tree and hedgerow loss, namely along the existing allotment track where the playing pitches and car parking area serving the school would be located. However, the two most significant mature oak trees would be retained and protected, with the long-term management of these to be secured by condition. These are trees T44 and T45 as shown on the above slide. Where other trees are proposed for removal, suitable replacements will be secured through the detailed landscaping proposals in order to ensure that appropriate mitigation measures are provided to compensate for the tree loss. The above slide shows the two retained mature oak trees along with the trees which are proposed to be removed. However, as mentioned, the detailed landscaping proposals secured by condition will need to provide acceptable mitigation for this loss, both in terms of the number of replacement trees, which will need to demonstrate a greater provision than a one-for-one removal, along with appropriate species. In terms of the proposed layout of the building itself, the design has been informed with both Department for Education and Special Educational Needs specialists' input to ensure that it would acceptably serve the needs of its intended users. The general arrangement internally, both at ground and first floor levels, would comprise classrooms being located off a central corridor running through the building. The ground floor would include a mix of primary and secondary classrooms, the school hall and kitchen dining facilities. The first floor would follow a similar layout and it would include further classrooms, various group and meeting rooms, as well as a staff room. As can be seen on this slide, the school building would be 2 stories in height with a flat roof. The external facade would comprise aluminium framed windows and doors and would be clad with thermowood panels, the colours of which would be based upon a natural wood palette. The design of the building would also incorporate on-site renewable and low energy sustainability measures, with solar PV panels proposed on the roof in order to achieve a net zero carbon development, which is a welcomed approach in this case. Whilst the following matters are dealt with under building regulations, ventilation to the school is proposed through a hybrid system, and the school is also designed to ensure appropriate internal acoustics and ambient noise levels are achieved. Whilst concerns relating to air quality were raised within the consultation responses, given the proximity to the M4, WBC Environmental Health Officer has raised no objection to the proposals on this basis and agrees that the future users of the site would not be exposed to unacceptable pollutant concentrations. The Department for Education has also not raised any concerns in this respect with regards to the site. Therefore, and in conclusion, the school proposals presented here are considered to be a sustainable development that would offer significant benefit to help meet an identified pressing need for additional SEN provision within the borough. The proposed design of the school is considered to be high quality, and although the site is not located within the existing settlement boundary, the principle of the development is considered to accord with the policy exception criteria concerning out of settlement proposals. The benefits and proposed mitigation measures of the scheme are considered to outweigh any harm identified, and as such, there are not considered to be any resulting harmful impacts arising from the proposals which would warrant the refusal of planning permission on this basis. Officers are therefore recommending the application for approval, subject to the conditions listed. I would like to draw members' attention to the member update, which amends the wording to condition 1 to rectify a typo error. Includes the list of drawings to be approved under condition 2, a replacement condition 19, and an additional informative relating to fire regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. So we come on to the speakers now. First of all, we have Matthew Garvey, the agent, and Sal Thirlway from Woking Borough Council. They're going to share 3 minutes. Over to you. Good evening.
Good evening, all. Can everyone hear me okay?
Little indistinct.
Chair members, good evening. Proposals presented here this evening are to meet an acute need for additional special educational needs school places within the borough. As members will be aware, the council currently has a shortfall of SEN spaces, with children currently being transported out of the borough to meet their educational needs. The application presented here this evening will help meet this need and ensure those children with special educational needs have the opportunity to go to school within their own borough. The proposals are a result of extensive pre-application discussions with the council's officers, consultation with members of the public, and careful review of potential impacts that the proposed development may have on the locality. The Department of Education are a funder of the project and have had early input on the proposals and consider the site to be a suitable location for a new SEN school. A number of sites and options for expanding Wokingham's SEN offer were explored and discounted due to their unsuitability for the proposed use. The examination of the application site by the DfE and its suitability to accommodate an SEN school, including examination of air quality and noise impacts, among other matters, has been undertaken and confirmed as acceptable for a school environment. The application has involved extensive dialogue and collaboration between the project team and the council's officers, who must be commended for their efforts in responding to updates and providing comments on the scheme in a proactive and timely manner. As detailed within the comprehensive report, the scheme works to retain key trees whilst providing sufficient levels of parking provision as part of a high quality scheme, which will deliver a teaching and learning environment which responds directly to the needs of the pupils. It is also of considerable note that the school has been designed to be highly sustainable, being a net zero carbon building. This is to be achieved through the use of a number of sustainable technologies such as air source heat pumps, PV panels and other passive technologies to ensure the building reduces its energy consumption needs and lowers its CO2 output. Members, the scheme presented here this evening has been carefully considered, accords with relevant planning policy and provides a valuable and much needed contribution to the educational services provided by the council. As such, I would urge members to support the positive recommendation and approve the application. I'll now hand over to the Assistant Director of Children's Services, who would also like to say a couple of things. Thank you.
Chair and members of the committee, just wanted to add to that the Oak Tree School will be complementing our existing SEND school provision in that it will complement Addington School, which provides for particularly focused around learning disability, and Chiltern Way Academy, formerly Northern House, that provides its focus for children with challenging behaviour and ASD, and it will give us a broad range of provision in borough for Wokingham's children. The fact that we won't be exporting children to out of borough provision means that children will have to travel less and therefore will arrive at school less tired and therefore enabled to engage better in learning and return home more speedily, so therefore can benefit from their ongoing family life as well. And there are a whole host of additional positive impacts that this school will provide in terms of our SEND resource strategy. As Matthew has done, I would also urge members to support this application from a Children's Services perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last speaker is Councillor Paul Fishwick, member for Winnersh, and we'll give you another 30 seconds. Paul, if you wish to have them.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak on this application. My original comments on this application are set out on pages 35 to 37 of the report. The planning report mentions that the site is also considered to be located in a sustainable transport location. However, the very nature of this type of school generates a considerable amount of motorised traffic, especially in the AM peak, and this will impact on the single and only access junction of Woodward Close with the A329 Reading Road that already queues at that time. This issue did not come out in the traffic modelling assessment report, which was provided over a month after the application closing date. The traffic modelling appears to have missed the western arm of Woodward Close, showing a zero traffic generation. This is a street with 60 dwellings that will generate car traffic and adds to the existing queues, making the situation worse than the forecasted traffic modelling. The traffic modelling without this additional traffic generation shows that the new King Street Lane junction with Hatch Farm Way, Winnersh Relief Road, will be at capacity and queues will occur at this junction. More traffic added means more congestion. I am pleased to see that the mature Oak Tree T44 has been retained with the redesign of the car park as I requested. If the application was granted I would request that the Borough Council stringently monitor the school travel plan and work with the school to maximise opportunities for alternative modes of transport to and from the school other than the car. I hope the committee consider the points that I have raised to make their decision, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Paul. As I just pick up on the points you raised, first of all, with Chris Easton. Welcome back to the committee, Chris. Paul was mentioning the right, I think it was the right section of Woodward Close not being involved or taken into account into the traffic modelling. And then there was a question on the travel plan. Could you comment on those, please?
Yeah, sure. I think I understand the bit you're looking at, Paul. Unfortunately, I wasn't the officer that dealt with this scheme, so I've picked it up to bring it to present it here tonight. My understanding of the data that's there is the table that's in the TA, I believe, from my understanding, shows the increase over what is already at the base. So it's basically indicating that from the school assessments, the increase on that junction from the school was understood to have no increase in the ratio of flow to capacity on that arm that you refer to. And then obviously in the rest of that table, it includes. So I believe the calculations that are in there are showing the increase from the school, not for the whole junction, because you are right. There is obviously flows already on that arm, and therefore something would have shown up. So that's my understanding of that. In terms of the travel plan, yeah, fully support that. I have no problem with either the local members or obviously yourself, Chris, to be party to the final travel plan before it gets signed off.
I think Paul also made the point about the King Street Lane Winnersh bypass junction being at capacity. Maybe this would push it over. I think you suggested that.
Yeah, so Paul and other members will recall at the time that the application for the North Woking Distributor Road and the Winnersh Relief Road were consented. We utilised a different type of model. So obviously in this application they've used here, they've done local junction models, which is correct, it's the correct method. And obviously as we presented them for the application before, we did a paramix model, which modelled all three of those junctions on that, forming that triangle in a sense, to demonstrate that obviously it would work. I think where we are is the point is that the scheme that's been built is built to the largest that it could be built. Obviously the constraints that are at King Street Lane and likewise at the bottom of North Woking Distributor Road, and obviously the effects that are changed from the new Winnersh Relief Road that go into play do see a kind of will see a betterment obviously at the Winnersh Crossroads once obviously the scheme settled down and is open.
Okay, thank you, Raj. So over to members, and Rochelle, you're the local member. Yes, I haven't forgotten. Go ahead.
I have several questions. The travel plan only applies really to the staff, not the students. What is the average number of staff that commute to a school on bus or train normally? I also state that the traffic modeling is on the website, but was not included either in this or in the supplementary planning information. Why wasn't it provided there? And I'm very happy the DFE decided to put sprinklers in the school, which is a fantastic idea, which we should have in all schools. But I'd like the answer to my questions about other things. And it's very interesting, and I still have not received the traffic modeling that was promised to me for a while ago for everything that's been doing at that particular junction, including when they're going to send it to me.
Chris, can you come in there?
I can, yeah. So just picking up on the travel plan, you mentioned, Rochelle, about some stats. Obviously, this school isn't up and running and open yet. So we've, through conversations and looking at existing schools, so our closest SEN school would be Addington. So from Addington and the travel plan that they run, it's demonstrated there's between 65 and 75% of the staff currently drive to school. And there is 20% of those which walk. So that's the type of measures we would be expecting to obviously look around those figures when the travel plan is being progressed. But you are right, it typically is only staff that would be coming by alternative sustainable modes. In terms of the transport assessment and the modelling data that you're referring to, that came in as a transport assessment, a TA addendum, transport assessment addendum, and that is on the council's webpage because I've currently got it open on my screen here to have it here tonight available. And with regards to the data, I'm not sure what data it is you're referring you've been awaiting.
traffic modeling for everything that's going on at that particular site and the site behind it and the other site, which John also promised me in last September, last December, and last February. But also I want to say that I have to, you tell me how many of the staff are actually driving schools. I will say that based on the fact that I live near 2 schools, probably, even though the Winnish train station is within spitting distance of at least one of the schools, the number of staff that actually commute on that are very low. And based on what I've seen living next to 2 schools, the traffic is going to be really difficult, because if you ever live next to a school or live next to 2 schools, you know exactly what be going through. And the traffic there's 2 schools there at this point right now. There's both Wheatfield and that one, and the new school. So it's going to be a significant problem on Woodward Close, on both arms of Woodward Close. And why was only 0, as Paul asked, why was only 0% extra traffic problems on the lower end of Woodward Close included, rather than both points having traffic?
I think Chris has dealt with that.
Yeah, I've covered that one. I think just on the travels to school, obviously this isn't your typical school where students jump out of cars all over the place within the vicinity or walking distance of a school. The majority of the pupils will be arriving by taxi, minibus, or the bus that's provided by the school. There's a long drop-off bay located in the school, as well as the layout of the car park itself. It has quite a nice circular kind of in and out through the site to help with some of that potential stacking, if there is any that occurs. And then again, itself, the road currently leading to it is off Woodward Close, which is quite a long road. Now, I'm not saying that's there to accommodate any stacking, but obviously should any vehicles for some reason be delayed, having one of the children be removed from the vehicle, then that will allow for a little bit more stacking without affecting the main highway, which is Woodward Close in this instance.
Okay, can I move on there? Come back to you if you like later, Rochelle. Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chris and Chair. I'd like to ask 3 questions, if I may. And the first is, again, related to the Reading Road Woodward Close junction. On page 39, it's stated that modelling for this junction shows it will, quote, operate under capacity. Now, I believe that capacity is measured on a scale of 0 to 1 using something termed RFC, and that anything in excess of about 0.8 means spare capacity is very limited and critically likely to lead to additional queuing. Are you able to share any actual capacity, existing capacity figures for this junction, and also to comment particularly on any potential impacts that building the school in this location might have on queuing? The second is a very...
Can I just deal with that one first, Andrew?
Sure.
Hi. So I think picking up on the basis of what you've referred to at the junction, we have the junction obviously it's being built obviously as it is now, and obviously designed for the Winnish Relief Road and the North Woking Distributor Road. In terms of the information that's in the application, you've got, it refers to, I can't recall the page, but yes, you are right in terms of we ideally seek for a junction to operate with capacity, with spare capacity at about 0.85, so you're 85%. In this case, the way, as I mentioned, the way the modelling has been done on an independent junction as a standalone junction, it comes in to be showing that with permitted development, i.e. what's already in the transport model, what's already permitted and consented in planning terms, and obviously this application, the junction is operating at about 100.6. So it's basically at the junction model they've undertaken shows that it's operating, but it's operating at its capacity. But as I mentioned, when we did the assessment for the overall scheme, which obviously isn't in front of us tonight, that's already been consented and being constructed. The way, and we need to bear in mind, the model is a snapshot in time, as we always reference, and it uses trip rates that are associated with a land use. The road that obviously was identified at the time, we used a paramix model to demonstrate that, yes, when you look at individual junctions, there are sometimes some stress that does appear at them. But obviously, in terms of using the parametric model to use all 3 junctions and have them modelled as a interacting entity on the network, it showed that the network actually did have some capacity. So I don't know if you recall as well that on the approach from Reading to Wokingham, one of those, the arm was identified to obviously have a potential theoretical capacity constraint in the future, only by the nature that it had priority over traffic coming from the North Wokingham Distributor Road. So there were safeguards built into the design, so ducting has already been put in as part of the scheme to accommodate that if that theoretical modelling that was identified comes to fruition come 2026 with all the anticipated development, that additional signal control could be put in to allow for that break in traffic to make that junction work at capacity. But as I said, we've worked on that scheme with all the local members to kind of get it to where it's got and get it to be delivered, demonstrated all that modelling, and the school, as put in front of us, is not demonstrating to have a significant harm, obviously hence the reason for NPPF linking to the council's policies for not objecting to this application.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Just for clarity, have I understood it correctly in saying that should capacity problems and queuing problems arise, that the recent redesign of the roadwork in that area would enable further mitigation measures to be triggered? Is that what you were saying?
So the way in some of the locations, yes. I mean, unfortunately, it is always the way. We are always going to have, if you add more to the network, you will obviously get a little bit more stress. In this case, it is deemed, whilst it's getting up to or at 100% theoretical on the modelling junction models that have been put into the planning application here, the junction does still operate. That will obviously mean that obviously as you get close to that point, you can receive additional queues and obviously you can receive additional delay. That's not hidden, and I think that's the same with any junction. But obviously we're also in a world, our models were obviously created a few years ago. This application is based on modelling that is based on the model that we have, and we're in a kind of a new world as well at the moment where traffic levels are lower, and don't get me wrong, they're not going to stay low. I'm sure they will start to get back to some sort of normality. People will come back out of cars, back onto public transport, but there is we need to let this junction, the North Wokingham and Winchester Relief Road open, let them settle down, and the small amount that this scheme adds to it, I don't believe we're going to see any additional impacts on that network in that location.
Thank you. My second question is very different. Page 33 makes reference to surface water drainage, but not to effluent from a school. I noticed there's a requirement for Thames Water approval before discharge into the public sewer system. Are officers confident that the existing system would be able to accommodate this? And is there any likelihood that an alternative might be required, for example, backup cesspit systems? And I think this is particularly significant, given the very short time span between now and the planned opening of the school, and the fact that we are dealing with quite a large and concentrated population of pupils and staff. So really important, sorry for sounding trite, but to make sure that it will be able to cope.
Sophie?
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously Thames Water need to be involved with regards to this scheme. Just want to recall back to whether we had a response from them. I just want to check at the front of the report. Notwithstanding that, the applicant would need to, sort of separate from the planning process, engage with Thames Water and get their approval for obviously the disposal of effluent waste on the site. I'm not able to confirm whether or not that conversation has taken place. I would imagine it has. And whilst it is relevant in terms of the planning application, it is something that is agreed outside of the assessment of the planning application, if you like. So I'm just going to check back to see whether we had a response from Thames Water. Yeah, so we did have a response from Thames Water and they raised no objection. So I would understand that would take it to mean that they are confident that the site can be accommodated within this existing sewer network. But as I say, those discussions will need to be held between the applicant and Thames Water.
Thank you. Was that the last question?
And I won't ask my third question. Thank you.
You won't?
No.
All right. Stephen?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Sophie and Chris, for answering the questions so far. Obviously, this application is fulfilling an important need. I know in his preamble, the Chairman told us that need was not a factor we should take into account, but clearly, in this case, it is of some importance. It is policy compliant in the sense that it's a permissible exception to policy to provide this kind of facility in this rural location. So I think I start from the belief that this is a good thing that we should be seeking to support if possible. However, I am very mindful that the local members have raised some really important issues. I'm sure everyone knows that Paul, in his previous life, was a highways officer in a different authority. So he comes with a great deal of expertise, and what he says counts for a lot in my reckoning. And he clearly has a lot of worries about this. I think Chris has done his best to address those. But I think for all of us, those worries about the junction and it's the pressure on it is I think still in our minds. I wonder whether we could pick up on perhaps the relatively easy bit that of what Paul was saying about the school travel plan. And Chris made a suggestion that it would be possible to get the approval of the local members when this is finalised. So could we amend condition 21 on page 29 so that we make it clear that within 6 months of the commencement of the school, an updated travel plan shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority after consultation with the chair and local members. Could I propose that as an amendment to condition 21?
I'm not sure whether that's not normal practice anyway. Justin, is it normal practice to actually explicitly consult all of the local members?
Stephen, I'll jump in here. If so if that's what the committee wants, we can go back and consult with the local members. It doesn't need to be in the condition itself because it needs agreement by the planning authority, and as part of instruction by the committee to us, we can go back on that. So the wording doesn't need to be changed.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Connor.
Just to clarify,
should we just either minute that as something that we would like to see happen, or do we need to add an informative? Or I'd welcome some guidance on procedure here. I just want to make sure this doesn't get lost and forgotten. That we've agreed that, well, we haven't yet agreed it, but assuming my colleagues think this is a sensible idea, that we want the local member input on signing off on this.
I'm quite happy to second it if that's any help.
Yes, I'm perfectly happy with it. I don't think it's necessary for the chairman to. I don't particularly want to get involved.
We'll free you of that responsibility, Chairman, and delegate it entirely to the local members.
I was trying to determine whether that was normal procedure anyway, whether it's necessary to do that.
If it's minuted, that's fine. We can take that away and make sure that when it comes back in, we consult with local members to agree the travel plan. So we don't.
Any members object to that, we can just minute it. Okay, Stephen, anything else?
If we can ensure it's minuted, which I'm sure we will, Callum will take the minute. I'd be very happy with that. That's all I think I need to say.
Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more on the subject of the travel plan, but not on the traffic. I can see peppered all over this report a great reliance on the travel plan. My experience of local schools is that travel plans are probably not worth the paper they're written on, and they're very seldom followed. What is the comeback if we have a travel plan that nobody follows? And if there isn't any comeback, what can we go do to protect ourselves from the fact that I was worried about parking spaces as well, by the way, from the fact that we haven't we've put something in a travel plan to mitigate a deficiency in the proposal, but then nobody's going to follow it anyway. Perhaps.
Chris, can you comment on that?
Yes. I I do sympathise with your scepticism about travel plans, Pauline. You know I'm not a big fan of developer ones, at least, which is why we've created the My Journey. I think in terms of school travel plans, it's slightly different. It's something that obviously we have a dedicated school travel plan officer, and we work closely with the schools to try and deliver what we need. So associated with, we've got conditions as well secured here. We've got the travel plan condition, we've got the parking layout condition, and we've got the parking management strategy condition as well as cycle parking. So there are supporting documents to try and help. All I can say is that, obviously with the input from the local members as well, and obviously the fact that it is operated by our education department, and we obviously will try our utmost best as a local authority to ensure, and obviously my team, when they review the travel plans, will obviously do their utmost best to make sure that those measures are met to achieve what we need. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Chris. So do we have more control on this because it's a school operated directly by us, rather than the multiplicity of primary and secondary schools we have that we don't have any control of because they're actually operated by the head teacher, and we've got no control over what actually happens once the planning application gets approved and the travel plan gets approved?
I don't know if it's operated directly by us. I don't know if anybody else can answer that question, but you'd like to think a school that obviously corporately we're delivering, we would be able to obviously have a stronger emphasis into how they deliver. As I say, the school travel plans working for the rest of the schools, non-SEN, do work pretty well.
No, they don't.
Well, we've got some good results coming out of some, which is good, and obviously we'll continue to work on those to improve them. But you're right, there are other measures that obviously we need to do to try and improve where we can. I can't say any more than that, unfortunately, Pauline, other than we'll review it and we'll be quite critical of it, and we'll set some measures in there to need to achieve it.
Thanks. Could you finally, sorry, just to come back once more, could you tell me what comeback we actually have?
Can I just bring Sal in? He might be able to, the assistant director, might be able to help us. He's indicated he wanted to.
Thank you, Chair. Just to question about whether we will be operating the school. The school will be operated by Maiden Early Trust as an academy school. However, as Chris mentioned earlier, as a special school, the modes of transport and therefore the transport plan will be quite different to what you would see in a normal, if I can call it that, mainstream school provision. And therefore, I think that we have a really good relationship with Maiden Early Trust, and therefore I think that the management of that school transport plan will be much more effective.
Thank you, Sal. So if it isn't followed, do you have direct comeback then?
If it isn't followed, we do have routes in terms of our engagement with Maiden Early Trust in respect of the commissioning of places of children. So we do have some levers that we can apply to some pressure with. However, actually, like I say, the relationship that we do have with Maiden Early Trust is positive, and I very much doubt that we would have the necessity to use such levers.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary.
I listened to the ward members' comments and I read those of the parish council, which I found very enlightening. And like me, they recognise the merit of the school, but there are issues that need to be resolved. And from a personal point of view, to me, it's sad that this is a wonderful scheme located in completely the wrong place. And my concern goes back to a coroner's call for a change of the law after air pollution led to the death of a 9-year-old, and the public inquest found the air pollution made a material contribution to a death. And I believe putting a special needs school near a motorway is a lesson we should all be very, very careful of. And if I was voting, I would actually vote to either refuse or possibly defer this item till some of the issues raised, particularly those raised by the local ward members, are addressed. Now, looking at the report in general, when I looked at page 21, it talks of existing trees and hedges to be retained, but it adds where possible. And then on page 27, paragraph 14, it really gives a license to the officers to remove anything they like, with no reference to the planning committee. They say remove hedges and trees as appropriate. Electric charging points on page 30 is another interesting point, where I'm very pleased to say that they say there will be some charging points for active and for passive for staff, but it mentions nothing for parents or visitors, and I would have thought they would require some charging points as well if we want to encourage climate emergency. The no noise assessment, I couldn't find in the document, or traffic modelling, but from listening to the conversations tonight, it would appear they appear in the online reports or documentation. I think it would have been helpful for those to have been included in the member documents. Page 51, paragraph 36, the environmental health talks of no detriment to the amenity of adjacent land owners and the quality of life. It actually makes no reference to the quality of life of the special needs children on site, which is a completely inappropriate location, as I've said before. Paragraph 66 then goes on to recognise poor air quality, but then makes no provision for a permanent air quality machine or machines on site. And I would have thought that was a necessity. If we're going to build something that there is a potential risk close to a polluting motorway, then the least we can do is put air quality machines on site, so at least we can monitor the air quality for the health of the children. And as I said at the very beginning, all in all, a great idea, but totally in the wrong place. And had I been there, I would either vote to refuse or defer the planning application. I think the ward members who've all commented should be involved in any changes to the conditions that are set to this planning application. But it is a worry for me, its location near a motorway, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Could you perhaps have a comment on the important matter of the health of the children and the well-being generally of the children who are going to be in this school, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the comments, Gary. As you say, our environmental health officer has reviewed both the noise assessment and the air quality screening assessment, which was submitted with the application. Obviously, it is recognised that the site is located, I think it's 0.6 kilometres from an existing air quality management area. However, the officer did not raise any objection to the scheme and considered that the health and well-being of the future users of the site would not be detrimentally impacted through its location in proximity to the M4. As I think Matt Garvey mentioned earlier on as well, the Department for Education has reviewed this site, is obviously well aware of the proximity, will have been involved in reviewing the assessments that have been undertaken. And officers are therefore satisfied on the basis of the fact that it's been assessed by environmental health officer. I'm not a technical officer, unfortunately. We've gone on the responses that we've been provided by our internal expertise on these matters. I don't know if there's any more I can sort of say on that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's one point really. One of the concerns I have with this, and there's another planning application comes up later, which is similar, is that in a way we're judge and jury. It's our land, our planning application for our needs, and really what we need to be seen is to be whiter than white. And in a way, when I listen to the ward members and the concerns they have, although they are supportive of the scheme, I don't believe that we are. And I think we need to be very, very careful how we progress this. And if air quality machines would be a way of making it clearer that we do concern about the health of our children in an area potentially polluting, then we should do it. And thanks again.
Well, just to emphasise that we're not here to rubber stamp an application just because it's working in borough council. You're independent of the council, and all members should remember that. Carl.
Thank you, Chair. I noted in the report that Winnersh Parish Council had objected on the swept path analysis for the accesses, and I think their concern was partly about future development that may be occurring on this site, not this school. And obviously, we're not looking at an application for that yet. But I just wondered whether this access has been built with that possibility catered for. I would assume so, but I'd like to hear whether that was the case. Linking into the actual diagram, which they referred to, I had a look at, and it kind of brushes off any problems really by saying it talks about the swept path analysis of a large refuse vehicle, which it says utilises the full carriageway width of Woodward Close, the access road when turning, which is considered to be appropriate given the relatively lightly traffic nature of this area and given the projected low frequency of refuse vehicle manoeuvres. But one, if there's going to be houses, it won't be lightly trafficked. And two, this isn't just about refuse vehicles. Obviously, that's going to be happening once a week, perhaps, and is going to be low frequency, but these are a representative of a large vehicle. Therefore, you know, schools have deliveries. This school will have deliveries in large lorries and so on. People have things delivered in lorries. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of that there. And when we think about the amount of traffic that we're talking about here, a junction at capacity has pretty much been admitted. Although that might change once the distributor road comes in. We're going to see backed up traffic. And now we know for a fact, I printed off the diagram and it's sweeping right into the other side of the road. And that will not be possible if there's traffic in that road, which sounds like it'll be likely. So I'm just interested to hear some talk about that really. I've got other questions as well, but if you take them one at a time, it'll be easier.
Chris, can you pick that one up, please?
Yes, hi. So I think it's kind of, the refuse vehicle is used as kind of a benchmark. It's a rigid vehicle and it's kind of one of the most common on our roads and covers most of that size vehicle. So yeah, you're right, there will be others, but in terms of the kind of one of the worst cases, we tend to use the refuse vehicles standpoint across the borough. I think you've kind of answered it yourself in some respects. We've had a look at it. It is a lightly trafficked road as we stand. The application, when the guys are reviewing this at the moment, the highways officer, you know, if there is a future application or not, he can't obviously take that into consideration at the moment. And if there is an issue there and it needs to be addressed for another application, then it needs to be addressed. But we have many roads in the borough where refuse vehicles do need to, or delivery vehicles do need to obviously sometimes manoeuvre, unfortunately, to the other side of the carriageway because not everything can be built to fit every size vehicle. A lot of our roads are already historic and they're existing. This obviously, granted, is new, but obviously in terms of the way the makeup is, it's deemed that it's appropriate and it's acceptable for the use that's currently there. That's all I can say. But any future application, you say we'll have to assess that again and make a judgment call at that point.
Yeah, I'll take the point, Chris. Thanks for that. Yeah, I take the point that it's this application we're doing, and on that basis, yes. But I do think that's something that we might want to revisit, or you might want to revisit if something else might happen in the future. Other question I've got, and just on the back of that as well, it seems to me that that road could have been a bit bigger, a bit wider, and I think there was space there to do it. Talking about space. On page 44, paragraph 21, it states that the gross site area of the school will be 16,925 square metres, which is 959 square metres below BB 104 guidelines for a school with the pupil take proposed. Now, I recognise from what it says that that's not a statutory requirement, it's a guideline. But my question is why? Because we look at those photographs we just saw of massive fields. There's clearly lots of space available. And, considering there's going to be lots of homes built there as well, apparently, if what we hear is going to happen. I'm just wondering why the reason for the space constraint. Is it the homes? Is that why this road isn't that wide? Is that why the school is a little bit smaller than it should be? Because we're expecting some houses to be built?
We can't, of course, take into account what might happen in the future. We have to consider planning application before us as ever.
Yes, but I just want to make the point that the school is smaller but lower than that guideline. So therefore, why when we have that space?
Yeah, what's the reason for that? Sophie?
I think I'll jump in here if that's okay. Sorry, Sophie. So obviously that's the application that was put to us by the Department of Education. So that's what we have to assess. We've looked at it. We've deemed it to be okay. The Department of Education are happy with it. What's coming in the future, that's not for us to decide at this stage. And we'll look at it in the future. So that's a land deal that happened outside of the planning process.
Okay, so sorry, I was kind of under the impression this land was Wokingham boroughs. I take it that's not the case then, and obviously there's only a certain amount of space. Okay, I can get that. My final question is on electric vehicle charging points. There was a suggestion in one of the objections, I think, or comments that this should be doubled, and I want to kind of back that up really and say why not? I mean, this application has 90 parking spaces. One we're going to do later on, Bishop Ponds Close, has 40 spaces, and there they propose to double the number of EV spaces themselves. That's great, and I will comment on that when we get to that one. And it's understandable, I think, that we restrict ourselves to policy. We have to. But this is a WBC application on a WBC site where we could yet again be setting an example for something that really needs to, have an example set. And I think it's pretty weak. And it's interesting that linked to that is the fact that one of the problems I have with this application, and I kind of agree with Gary a lot, air quality. I really don't think we should be building it next to a motorway. That seems terrible to me. And when you read the air quality management, the plan in this application that goes alongside it, there's lots of kind of talk of how, it's all under the statutory minimums and so on, which it is. I accept that, and I accept there's nothing we can do about that in that instance. But it's really close to the limits. It's not like, and this is kind of serious damaging pollution here that we're putting a lot of school kids next to. So I don't like that idea. But to link into this EV parking thing, that data, which is predicted, and all the predictions for that kind of assessment, of the ones in this application and others, are all based on the fact that EV take-up is going to expand massively in the future years, and therefore reduce the number of cars producing this pollution. And our climate emergency plan talks of encouraging businesses and residents and making a significant commitment towards achieving those savings from having electric vehicles. And yet here, we're not expanding the number of charge points aggressively when we could do so. So I don't know how those two things make up. We're not actually, these predictions aren't going to be hit if we're not putting more of those electric vehicle parking things in. So I'd just be interested to know why we're not having more. I recognise there's a limit and we have a policy, and that should be our minimum. If it's a site that we're controlling in some way, we should be ramming them in there. Thanks.
Sophie or Chris again? EV points.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, if they showed 90, I'd be more than happy. If they showed 10, I'd be more than happy. But they're showing 4, which we're happy with because that complies with our policy. If they wish to put more in, then we're all for that. But we obviously can't force them to show any more than they're showing because they comply with policy. But there's not much more I can say other than if they want to put more in, then we'll accept that. But I think through the travel plan, although travel plan doesn't necessarily help with electric vehicles because that's still obviously it still means there's still a car coming to the site. The travel plan will hopefully be focusing on reducing people needing to come by car, whether that's a sustainable car or a normal car. But we're focusing on trying to get them to other modes of transport rather than just the car. But yeah, if they want to put more in, I've got nothing more to add on that.
Yeah, it appears we do not have control over the application which has been submitted. That's the problem.
I was literally just about to say that, this is probably where my confusion's coming in. I kind of assumed this was it's down to academisation, basically. Tony Blair's to blame most things. That's fine. Great, thanks.
Sam.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to the size of the school. How, it says here 150 places, how comparable is this in size to other SEND schools in the area? And also as a as a councillor, as many as everyone here in the meeting in this room, we get regular sort of emails from parents about schools full. How have they come to this figure of making it 150 places? Is this adequate? What's the current demand like for this? And do they have access to the forecasted figures of how likely is demand likely to rise over the next few years? And are there plans to increase the size of the school later on?
Sophie?
I was actually hoping that Sal might be able to assist in answering that question. I'm afraid I don't have that specific information to hand. Is that okay, Sal?
Absolutely. As a new school of this size, the numbers are, or the pupil numbers are appropriate for the size of the school build. The numbers themselves were based on the joint submission initially made by ourselves in partnership with Reading Borough Council and West Berkshire Council to the DFE for a new SEND provision within our area. And that was based on a kind of needs assessment of the numbers that are coming through from each local area. During the process of the bid programme, West Berkshire removed themselves from the bid, so it became a shared bid with Reading and Woking, and so we made sure that we were putting forward the right numbers based on our assessment of need in terms of children that meet the criteria for the school.
Thank you. Sam, you want to come back?
Thank you. Yeah, I think just it would be great to consider, if the size is appropriate in terms of pupil numbers and whether, does this number need to be greater? Because I'd hate for this school to be built and then in 1 year, 2 years, it's already full and, we're sort of scratching our heads thinking, oh, it should have been 250.
If I may, this forms part of our broader SEND strategy and SEND sufficiency strategy. And what we do know is that there will be increasing and continuing increasing demand for school places within the borough. And we would expect that over the next sort of decade or so that we will be looking and needing additional places within the borough to meet our SEND needs. But this particular school, the Oak Tree School, forms part of that strategy and responds to the needs that we have in the immediacy, or some of the needs that we have in the immediacy.
Thank you very much.
Just to clarify, so this is the only site in either Reading or Woking Borough suitable for a SEND school at present, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. A number of sites were explored, both in Reading and this site was the only site that was deemed appropriate for this school.
Yeah, I don't think we've stressed enough the importance of these SEN schools. I think it needs considerable weight, and even if there are some traffic problems, I think they override that, and I'll certainly be supporting this application. Stephen, I think you want to come back.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to come back. I really wanted to return, if I may, to the issue of air quality, which was raised by Gary and also by Carl. Now, Gary, of course, is in a very difficult position because he's not able to actually physically be here. He can't propose any amendments. He can't vote, which is a great shame, given his experience and knowledge. So I feel incumbent upon me, really, to ask whether the point he made about air quality measuring equipment on the site could be pursued. I wonder whether there is scope for us adding a condition regarding air quality measuring equipment so that we can assure ourselves and take action if necessary that the air quality does not reach dangerous levels on this site. So I wonder whether there's scope for our adding a condition along those lines.
I mean, that sounds very reasonable. Perhaps that's something that maybe they're planning to do that anyway, but Connor?
What I was going to say is, obviously our environmental health officers have looked at it. The DFE have looked at it. They both considered the site to be suitable in terms of air quality and the other reasons. So I think it is a bit unreasonable for us to impose a condition on them to do that. However, the council is in control of its own air monitoring equipment. You can get temporary equipment that you can set up. So if the council chooses to do that in the future, to place equipment there, then we could easily do that. But to actually place a condition on this, on the DFE, who are the applicants to monitor air quality, I feel would be unreasonable as part of this application, given the experts on our side who are environmental health have said there is no issue.
I suppose my concern is what might happen in the future, and if we've got no way of measuring what the current situation is. If Connor's advising that we don't put on a condition, can we at least add an informative, bearing in mind that the council, as you said, has in itself air quality measuring equipment, and maybe that informative could involve encouraging the council to use its own air quality measuring equipment, mobile air quality measuring equipment, to regularly monitor air quality at this site. Would that help? It would be an informative, so it can't be, it's not going to have any impact on the applicants, but it would help us just remind everyone of the importance of maintaining a safe environment for this very vulnerable group of young people.
I think from a planning point of view, an informative will be fine. It obviously reinforces the committee's desire to make sure that the occupants of the school are safe. So yeah, an informative I don't see a problem with.
Okay, I think it's an excellent idea, Stephen. I have to second that, so I'll take a vote on that. If the wording's okay with you. But those in favour of adding that informative, I think that's probably unanimous, I think. Thank you, Stephen. Rochelle, back to you.
A couple of questions. What mitigation of the junction would be possible, since there's no extra land there?
Where are you?
Put some more land there. Second of all,
sorry, which page you on? Thought you were
Connor said that they would be they could mitigate the junction with Woodward Close, and it would be possible to do some mitigation to improve the capacity there. I'm asking where he'd get the land to do that, considering there's no land there. I'd also like to say there used to be an air quality measuring station on the corner of Woodward Close and the Reading Road. So it should be possible to put one there. And last of all, I'd like to say, since the junction is running at 100% of capacity, obviously the highways will have to object to having 340 more houses put on that site eventually, because it wouldn't be possible since to be over capacity. So I'd like to see when you're going to put that out, Connor.
You know,
and where you're going to get the land
is
from.
irrelevant, Rochelle, as you know.
And where you're going to get the land from.
It's Chris you're actually referring to, not me.
Chris, sorry. I'll talk to Chris instead.
That's fine. I was quite offended.
I mixed you two up. I can't help it.
That's fine, Rochelle. I fully understand. No, I didn't mention we could mitigate that junction. I mentioned that the roundabout for part of the Winnish Relief Road scheme and the NDR scheme had some further mitigation that had been built into it already as part of the early design. In terms of this junction coming out of Woodward Close, you need to remember that that has changed in the way it works, and obviously it's going to be left in, left out, operated between the two roundabouts, which obviously significantly does help the operation of that junction by obviously not having traffic waiting to turn across oncoming traffic. As I say, the assessment that's been undertaken demonstrates that the residual effect of the school scheme does not have a significant effect on that junction operation, and therefore is not deemed, as I say, to have any capacity constraints.
But you said it was at almost 100% capacity at this point on that particular arm of the junction. And since that is 100%, you can't get more than 100%, you realize. There's a lot of people who say that they're in favor of something by 150%. That's not possible. You're either in favor of it or against it. And since it's at capacity now, how in the world could you possibly have 340 plus more houses there? So obviously highways will object to that and they will not go forward.
It has nothing to do with this,
Right.
Rochelle. I'm conscious that
we
we.
Future idea for him. That's all.
I'd like to make some progress. It's 8:10 and we're still on the first application. Is there any member wishing to make an alternative recommendation? I'll allow people to make more comments. I don't get the feeling there's anyone going to propose anything
Pauline's
else.
got her hand up.
Sorry, I didn't
Did
want to make an alternative recommendation, but I do have a question about.
Yes, go ahead,
Yeah.
Pauline.
Not about traffic. You'd be delighted to know. It was a point about the energy and sustainability point on 26. It's a bit vague. Is that energy? Are we going to have solar panels on the roof of the school? And will that supply the forecast energy need of the school or not? This sort of says it'll meet some standards, but the standards aren't in here, so it's quite difficult to tell what it's actually going to do. I'm just wondering if somebody can clarify that. And the second point was about the EV points. We've said quite a lot about wanting more EV charging points, but please, if we're going to do that, can we make them available to people who don't have EV cars as well? Because I'd hate to see all the traffic on the road because you've got EV parking only in the EV charging points. Just a small point.
Someone comment on that, please?
I can comment regarding the solar panels. Yes, just to confirm that it is proposed that there will be solar panels on the roof of the building and other sort of fabric first measures in the construction of the building, the use of air source heat pumps. So the solar panels are proposed in order to achieve the net zero carbon rating. Or I'm not sure what the technical term is, but that is correct. They're the measures proposed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I think Gary, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'd like to challenge Connor's point there when he said that he was really critical of the elected members making proposing a condition against officer recommendation. I'd like to point out very clearly, and all of us have been on the planning committee for some time, have done it before, that it's within the proper rights of the planning committee members to propose a condition that is against the officer's wishes. It's then a matter of the applicant whether it's to decide to appeal it or whatever. But I would say that we are within our rights to actually do it, and it's quite wrong, very, very wrong, I would say, to actually say that we can't. And I'd ask Connor to withdraw that remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Certainly the committee can add conditions. I think Connor was saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it was, in his view, an unreasonable condition to impose on the applicant. Is that right, Connor?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's because it was tested. In my view, from a professional planning point of view, it's unreasonable to add another condition on that's been tested. But the informative would be, right, that's not to say you can't put conditions on. Of course, you can as a planning committee.
But then Connor clearly said the quite opposite, and you must emphasise members can put a planning condition on a planning application completely against the officers of the recommendation. It's their entitlement, and we must not lose that. Thank you.
You're right, Gary. I agree with you. So can we go to no alternative for proposal? I see. So go to the recommendation on page 22. We have an extra informative, which would be number 11. Which is Stephen's air quality informative, and we have three amended conditions 1 to 19 in the supplementary planning agenda, as well as informative 10. I see those in favour of approving this application, please. Any against? Abstaining? Just one. Okay, that application is approved. Thank you very much, and we move on to the Markham Farms application. Simon Taylor is the case officer. Evening, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. This is a large application, so I'll attempt to be fairly succinct in my summary of it. It's an application for 52 hectares solar farm, comprising approximately 47 hectares of solar panels, 67,000 panels 3 hectares of tree planting in the southern area of the site, and the retention of farmland in the southwestern corner. Sorry. The application is the response to the council's declaration of a climate emergency in 2019. It's intended as the first of 5 applications. Sorry, 5 solar farms that are due to come forward in future years. It's on council-owned land. It's on behalf of the council, and it's intended to generate an investment return over its lifetime. So in that respect, the Secretary of State have requested that the matter be forwarded to them for their consideration as to whether they want to have any further input. The recommendation on this application takes into account that request. Just briefly going through the application, you'll note here you've got this is the landscape scheme. The planting is in the southern corner. You're looking into this. The blue here are the solar panels. They're established in rows across the site. You'll also note a site compound with substation on Barkham Ride. Through the site, you have existing power lines through the site, and these will be used for a proposed greenway. And in addition to that, you've got 5 transformer buildings across the site, interspersed across the entire site. There's 2.4 metre fencing, security fencing, that is to an extent ecologically permeable to allow movement of wildlife through it. As evident in this plan here, that will be surrounding the site. There'll be some access roads through the site for maintenance purposes. CCTV, there is grid connection evident if we continue up onto Barkham Ride to connect to an existing substation. There's been 57 objections to the application. There's been 11 in support and 1 neutral. Barkham Parish Council have also given tentative support, raising various questions, but no objection to the application. Woking Town Council are also within the site, being the connection to the Barkham Road for the grid connection. They are objecting to the application, as are Finch Hempstead Parish Council. The primary issues with this application are the fact that there's a loss of agricultural land, there's visual harm to the landscape, there's encroachment of development, there's less than substantial harm to the listed buildings, there's archaeological aspects to the scheme, there is construction, traffic management issues, there is some hedgerow loss, and there's ecological matters to take into account. But these matters are to be weighed against the significant public benefit of the climate emergency and the benefit that would come from the generation of renewable energy that will be reinvested into the grid, and then the profits from that reinvested by the council. I'll deal briefly with these impacts that impact upon the best and most versatile agricultural land. Dealing with the area review here, it is grade 2 and grade 3 agricultural land, so the policy does aim to protect that land. So there is a policy departure, but it is worth noting that the application is temporary for 25 years. It is also reversible, so there is no major concerns with its reverting back to its original use, subject to conditions relating to remediation of the site. Natural England, who are the statutory body who look at review the application in terms of the loss, have not objected to the application. It's also worth noting the site isn't made entirely. It is still feasible that in the future years that the site could be used for agricultural purposes, given farming can occur around the solar panels, although that hasn't been established yet. There is landscape and visual harm. Just going through the photographs here, these are views from Commonfield Lane, which run along the western side of the site. This is taken from Barkham Ride, admittedly just inside some established hedgerow that runs along Barkham Ride. You'll note the power lines that run through the site there in the top photograph. This is taken from footpaths at the northern end of the site around the listed buildings. These are taken from the corner of Barkham Street and Commonfield Lane, which is in the vicinity of that. You'll note there is with this photograph and moving back to these photographs, there is existing screening that will provide some screening to the development. These photographs are footpaths along the northern part of the site, linking with the Rook's Nest Wood, and this is taken from the edge of Rook's Nest Wood, with significant woodland in behind that, screening any occupants within that Rook's Nest Wood seam. So there is identified harm, but that is considered by the landscape officer to be acceptable. There's no attempt to screen the development entirely through landscaping, and it is acknowledged that there is landscaping will take several years to establish itself. Just moving on quickly onto the encroachment. You'll note, just look at this plan there, it is separate from Finchampstead. The farm that's retained is in this corner here, so it is separate from Arborfield and it is separate from Barkham. So there is development in the countryside, but it is considered to be acceptable in terms of its encroachment harm. There is some harm to listed buildings in the northern part of the site. It's less substantial. There's an objection noted by Historic England and by the Council's Conservation Officer. That isn't disputed. As a planning officer, I'm not in a position to provide contrary advice on that, except to note that it is less substantial and it is temporary in the scope of the actual scheduled monument in the listed buildings. So it's 25 years amongst the several centuries that those items have been there. Archaeological harm has been identified, but it can be suitably ameliorated through various measures that will be addressed in future details to be submitted. Traffic impacts have been reviewed by the Highways Officer. They're found to be acceptable, subject to further information. That it does include no peak hour movement of HGV vehicles that are delivering the solar panels and no access via Barkham Ride. Those measures are still to be dealt with through future measures, but in principle there is no objection. There is hedgerow loss, but it will be replaced. It is offset with significant amount of replacement planting along Barkham Ride. There is some ecological harm, but it is worth noting that there's a biodiversity net gain of 10% over the next 30 years. It also would be retained as meadow and grassland, which would allow it to remove grazing from the site, so that would be a significant improvement over those times. So moving to the planning balance, it is a significant and pressing climate emergency that has been acknowledged by the council, and this weighs heavily in favour of the scheme. It is important to note it is temporary, it's reversible. It comes with added additional benefits of the carbon sink and the greenway, and in council's reinvestment opportunities. And subject to conditions, I won't deal with all the conditions. There are landscaping, traffic, ecology, and other details required prior to commencement of the development. And importantly, condition 28 does look at remediation to decommissioning of the scheme. Application is recommended for approval in that regard, subject to it then reverting to Secretary of State. I also just note the members' update does make various changes to conditions. They are all based on timing of the details to be submitted rather than any significant changes to the scheme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. With two speakers, and the first one is Ian Williams. Good evening, Mr. Williams.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Great, thank you. So good evening, Chair and members of the committee. I've circulated slides ahead of the committee members that are available. You should have them. That will just reflect what I'm going to say. I will focus on 3 points. The first point is a key concern regarding the loss of best and most versatile land. I'm going to refer to that as BMV land. Whilst the application is contrary to national policy avoiding the use of BMV land, the applicant considers the benefits of this project to outweigh the harm, but they have ignored elements of this policy and guidance. The Secretary of State has stated that any proposal for a solar farm involving BMV land would need to abide by the most compelling evidence. The information supplied to date does not appear to provide the most compelling evidence. With respect to grade 3A land, I want to mention 4 requirements. First, an explanation should be given as to why the development needs to be located on this land and not land of a lesser classification. The explanation given is that it's council owned. This is not compelling evidence and ignores all other land. For example, if a house builder justified the construction of homes on the grounds that it only considered land it owned, the council quite rightly would give little weight to that justification. So it's not been demonstrated that other sites are not available, including smaller ones and different varieties, or there are other alternative ways of achieving the relatively small net carbon benefit of this proposed development. Second, relates to the viability of the farm to continue to function. Only 5 hectares of land of a farm will be left, a fraction of the current enterprise, and which clearly is not viable. This project does not help the farm's viability through diversification. What is being proposed is the exact opposite of that. Third, relates to the impact of the development of the supply of farming land within the same classification. Little evidence has been provided. Whilst it's suggested that there's a large supply, no survey has been undertaken. The information provided does not distinguish between 3A and 3B land, and it also advises there is little grade 2 land in the area. Fourth, relates to the cumulative impact of all similar developments on the supply of BMV land. No assessment of the cumulative impact on the supply of BMV land has been undertaken. There are more steps to be taken for grade 2 land, but the applicant has so far failed to do those required for grade 3A land. This is not the most compelling evidence. The other points I want to make relates to heritage and ecology. On heritage, intrusive surveys to assess impacts on archaeological assets remain outstanding. Until these are concluded, members are unable to undertake the balancing exercise set out in the National Planning Framework. And on ecology, the assessment on protected species, in particular great crested newts, is not adequate as it relies on eDNA sampling. Great crested newts have been detected in a number of locations, but eDNA cannot assess the size of the population. Traditional survey methods are required to take place to establish the size before a final decision is made. To summarise, a number of significant information gaps need to be rectified to ensure that members have sufficient information for them to make an informed and lawful decision on planning permission. This is the council's own application, and it needs to ensure it sets a good example rather than a bad one. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. And now we have Councillor Gregor Murray, who's the Exec Member for Resident Services, Communications and Missions. Good evening, Gregor.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for committee. When this council declared a climate emergency in July 2019, it was clear from the outset that to reach our aims, we would have to make some difficult decisions and implement some bold interventions. The application you're discussing tonight is one such intervention. Our climate emergency action plan includes an objective to deliver 4 solar farms with the potential of generating in excess of 20 megawatt hours of electricity. To achieve this, we've looked across all of our larger land holdings, and this application is the first of our solar farm proposals to be brought forward. The current energy use of WBC is approximately 37 megawatt hours per annum. The projected peak output of this solar farm is 29.6 megawatts. This solar farm would therefore make a significant step towards offsetting the council's own carbon emissions. It would also reduce the total borough's carbon footprint by a little under 1%, which is a substantial impact. But the environmental benefit of this application isn't just about green energy. Almost 11,000 trees will be planted as part of this application, with further landscaping and planting across the development as well. A new greenway running north to south across the site will link existing public rights of way. Grassland enhancement, woodland creation and hedgerow improvements and planting is anticipated to provide a significant biodiversity net gain. Local labour opportunities will also be available as part of the construction, and all of these elements will themselves play an important part in the delivery of our climate emergency action plan. As part of the extensive pre-application consultation, WBC have sought to consider and respond to the comments raised, identifying and resolving issues where possible. Council officers have met with the parish councils to explain the scheme and to understand their key concerns and issues. Conversations have been ongoing with the farmer about how the council can accommodate his continued occupation of the site, including the farmhouse. The consultation culminated in a number of amendments to the project which are presented here tonight. These amendments are designed to lessen the impact on the heritage sites and for the farmer, and to improve the public rights of way. As a result, we believe we've acted positively and reasonably to the comments received, and feel we are presenting a scheme here that the Planning Committee may get behind and support. The development is not without its impact. The impact to landscape views, heritage assets and alternative land use are outlined in the officer's reports. But I want to be very clear here. All of these impacts are both temporary and reversible. More importantly, set against the positive effect on our carbon footprint and the broader environmental good, the benefits more than outweigh the impacts. We therefore hope that the committee will look favourably upon the proposals when they consider the planning application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Can I deal with some points that Mr. Williams raised initially? He was talking about alternative sites. Gravy mentioned that we were looking for 4 solar park sites, but it says in the application that this is the only suitable one at the moment. Can you clarify whether there is alternative sites, might be, or definitely there aren't any, please? Simon.
Thank you, Chair. The answer I can give that those solar farms I don't think are going to be of the same scale. So this is the largest of the 5 schemes. So this site is the most suitable to accommodate that scale.
Thank you. Have we done a survey for the supply of grade 2 agricultural land in the area? Mr. Williams is suggesting we have not. Is that a requirement?
The information that was submitted to the application, my understanding that there wasn't a survey done of the grade 2 land. The council does own a lot of the area in there, so I can just share my screen for 1 second. I'll bring it up. This land here is the yellow and the red is council-owned land. Majority of that is agricultural land. Sorry, down in the south here is Sang and California Country Park. The rest is agricultural land. So there is land in the immediate area being retained for agriculture. Beyond that, no, there's no further explanation for the cumulative loss of grade 2 agricultural land.
Okay. Heritage and ecology. Mr. Williams mentioned the size of the Great Crested Newt population. Can you comment on that, please?
I draw you back to the report. I'm clearly not a skilled ecologist. The report does deal with Great Crested Newts. The ecologist has looked at all aspects of wildlife and reptiles, birds on the site. So they've looked at Great Crested Newts and found the proposal to be acceptable. Beyond that, I can't provide any further explanation in terms of the eDNA and surveys that are undertaken. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, yes, all right. So over to members. We have no local member, but Rebecca is a neighbouring member for Finch South. Do you want to speak now, or perhaps later, Rebecca?
No, I'm happy to speak now. Thank you, Chair. This solar farm and the size of it is so significant that it will severely impact the landscape of the area. And obviously that is a big concern for residents in Finchampstead. It is the last green space, it feels like, between Finchampstead and Arborfield. But obviously it has huge merits that we have to consider. I still have concerns about construction traffic, that it hasn't been considered completely, in that Barkham Ride, Barkham Street is a very narrow road. I'm concerned about closures of that road, although I've been assured from previous questions I've asked via email that that won't happen. But as a local resident of Finchampstead, we are subject to other road closures at the moment. We have 9 Mile Ride extension is not complete. We have the ridges closed due to the landslip. So these are significant issues that I feel very concerned about, and I know our residents concerned about. And also there are some details that I feel have not been fully covered as well. I hope somebody can answer for me, is about the lighting and about the CCTV that is suggested. This is a rural area. I'm concerned about what the scale would be of this lighting, and also CCTV cameras that would surround the site. So those are my main areas of concern that I would like some further clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Can you pick some of those up, Simon, please, or other officers?
There's comments about landscape harm. I think the report does explain that there is landscape harm. I think I've attempted tonight as well in my presentation to explain that there will be harm. It's accepted. There is some screening to prevent more prominent views, but it's not intended to screen them out entirely, and it won't be achieved in the immediate either. So we're accepting the landscape harm. Solar panels are a slightly different development to housing or any other large-scale development. So that harm is to be weighed against the overall benefits of the scheme. Construction traffic was a fairly significant concern from various residents. The highways officer has had fairly detailed conversations with the applicant. They are in principle, support is reached, but the conversations are ongoing in terms of reaching agreement in terms of the routing of HGVs. Barkham Street is acknowledged as being inadequate width for HGVs, so there is a proposal to not include Barkham Street and not include movement of HGVs during peak hours, subject to them and revised traffic management plans and construction management plans. The highways officer is satisfied with that. The construction period is about 3 months to the installation of the solar panels. Each HGV, I'm understanding, this is in the report, but off the top of my head, is able to accommodate about 1,900 solar panels. So there aren't a huge amount of HGV movements across each various day. In addition to that, our Barkham Road will be dug up progressively over the course of the 3 months to accommodate the grid connection, but that won't close that road entirely. Details about lighting. Lighting is limited to the buildings, so there are 5 transformer buildings and a substation building. The condition in the permission, the recommendation to make them sensor activated. Most of the time they won't need to be utilised because there would be no access during the evening periods when the lighting is required. So beyond that, there's no site lighting of the solar panels or anything else around the site. So lighting is not a concern, but those details are required by condition. CCTV, likewise, there was some limited information about CCTV, but there's no information about their locations or the number of the CCTV. In any event, the council would endeavour to minimise the number of CCTV across the site. They are intended for security purposes, so it's acknowledged that some CCTV will be required, but we look to sensitively locate them and minimise the number of them.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Rebecca? Not probably satisfactory answer.
Sorry, just still about the traffic management, and you're talking about the actual digging up of Barkham Ride. I appreciate this maybe with temporary kind of closures or with traffic lights, but how is this going to be mitigated with other roads within the area are still not potentially be fully open? I do have a huge concern because this is a main route out of Finch Hampstead. It's a commuter route, you know, as most people are aware, if you live in Finch Hampstead, public transport is limited. We have, you know, very few buses. There is no other way of getting out of the area apart from using your car. And with the currently 9 Mile Ride still being shut, although it is proposed to be open in October, I still have concerns. I don't really feel that's been 100% addressed.
How would they in the cables? That would be traffic lights, would it? And
Chris, yeah, just picking that up. I mean, we're going way beyond the application into quite significant detail at the moment. You are right. There are roadworks in the area. The Ridges, a design scheme to mitigate those issues, is underway, and obviously as Councillor Margetts just mentioned, the October date for opening an Armour Ride is there. So we're only around the corner for those improvements. I'm not sure the timeline of this one coming through, but nothing could be done in the highway without obviously streetworks being coordinated, and that would need to be done, you know, post obviously consent, and once they get the detailed design, and obviously come to us with a correct proposal from the Energy Board, who will obviously then put their contractors to a design and come to us with a traffic match. So there's a lot that will happen, and it's not going to happen in like the next couple of weeks, I can assure you. There's lots of work going on, and they will all be pretty much cleared before this takes place.
Sorry, Chris, I'll just jump in. There's a construction program in the current construction management plan, and we're looking at the installation of the underground electrical system, which includes across the entire site and through to the substation in Barkham Road, is in months 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So it is a fair way off. This still has to proceed to the Secretary of State for their review as well. So,
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Gregor gave a very good summary of the case for this application. Clearly, it is intended to, and almost certainly will, make a contribution to the Council's climate emergency plans measures, which are designed to try and tackle locally the climate emergency. It clearly has some capacity for income generation, which is no doubt attractive to the Council too. The tree planting it has got to be a good thing in itself. So there are many really compelling reasons to think the planning balance tips heavily in favour of this application. However, I am mindful of the fact that this would almost certainly go to the Secretary of State for investigation and to make sure it's acceptable. So I think it's incumbent upon the Council as a planning authority to try and make sure that this application is as robust as possible. And as we stand, I think there are clearly some problems with the application that I think it would be in the interests of the Council to seek to address to maximise the chances of success of this application should it go forward to the Secretary of State. So it's in that spirit that I'm making these suggestions, not in opposition to this, not in outright opposition, but with concern about some of the aspects that we haven't yet, I think, adequately addressed. Mr. Williams, I think, very helpfully identified what he described, I think correctly, as information gaps. And the most notable, it did seem to me, was we have no survey undertaken of existing grade 2 land, which I think really would be a useful thing to add. I'm also concerned, and this is an unusual situation, I have to say, where we have 3 statutory consultees all raising objections to an application. We have obviously concerns expressed by Berkshire Archaeology about the archaeological disruption caused by this application. we have concerns expressed by Historic England about the impact on the listed buildings and the other heritage assets close to the site. And those concerns about the listed buildings and the heritage assets are shared, I note, particularly by our own conservation and heritage officer. So really, what I'm hoping we can do is find a way to work towards mitigating as much as possible these concerns that have been expressed. Some good work has obviously already been undertaken, and I'm very grateful for Simon for a very balanced report, which clearly indicates that this is a complicated issue to deal with because policy pulls in different directions. But I would feel much more comfortable about giving this application support if we could actually defer it at this stage to try and address some of these outstanding issues and to try and get ourselves in the position where this was as good as we could get it before it might be viewed by the Secretary of State. So without, I hope, completely curtailing discussion on this, I would look to a seconder for a proposal that we actually defer this application to try and address further the concerns of the statutory consultees who've raised objections and to address some of the information gaps that Mr. Williams identified, in particular relating to the Grade 2 land survey.
This reminds me a bit of the South Woking Distributor Road, when some members wanted to make a change to the application. I think that's one of the difficulties. The first thing you raised, Stephen, was saying there wasn't a survey, and I'm sure it's perfectly proper. We could defer to get such a survey done, saying that we couldn't make our minds up because that's how it goes. But I'm not quite sure exactly what you're proposing. We can't really, we can't change the application. I don't think, which I'm sure you would agree with.
So I'm not proposing that we change the application. I'm proposing we try to do things that might mitigate the concerns expressed by 3 statutory consultees who have all raised objections. I think that would strengthen the application if we were able to do that.
Chair, would you mind if I just jumped in on some of these points?
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Stephen, for recognising it's a fair and balanced report. Just on the first point about the best and most versatile. So the application's changed since it was submitted, and about 5 hectares of what's Grade 2 has been returned back to the farmer, so wouldn't be developed. The BRE guidance, which exists for larger solar farms, refers to sites of over 50 kilowatts per hour should be directed towards lower grade land. This is about 30 kilowatts per hour, so it's not actually relevant to this site. You've also got to be aware that, as Simon said, and as Gregor said, any impact here is temporary. It's a 25-year period, whereupon it will be reverted back to agricultural. And frankly, it could still be grazed by sheep during the time that it is used for solar generation. And importantly, the statutory body, Natural England, have been consulted and they do not object to the scheme. Now, this is a similar situation if you want to parallel to us saying something's unacceptable on flooding grounds when the Environment Agency say that it is acceptable. And really on this best and most versatile point, we are reliant on the statutory consultee, who is Natural England, and they don't object. Just on the other consultees, if I could, Berkshire Archaeology, I think, have some concerns, but there is a mitigation strategy that could be put in place if it's found that there is significant archaeology. It's simple enough to put the relevant panels on concrete pads that wouldn't affect the archaeology. So there's an easy solution, albeit that we've got the comments from archaeology saying that they've got concerns that can be overcome. On the historic points from Historic England and from our own consultee, Historic England do actually recommend some conditions if we're minded to approve. They're included in your agenda. I can't remember the numbers. Simon will let you know what they are. But the scheme's evolved since it was originally submitted. So it's now been moved from 20 metres away from the heritage assets to 25 metres away from the heritage assets, which, when you consider that it's 2.1 metre high structures for a temporary period and would be screened and is a fair distance, your officer's view is that actually the harm can be reasonably mitigated. So I take the point about having concerns, but actually I think the report and the update and what the officers told you should actually help you be able to make a decision this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I'll come back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Just really, I think it would be helpful if we could see, Simon was able to show us some detailed plans of the location of these heritage assets and listed buildings, and what proposals there are for screening between them and the site. That's not easy to see from the information we've been given so far. I'm grateful for that.
I can do that for you. I'll be 10 seconds in getting there. I'll show one screen. So you've got a scheduled monument being a moat around a listed building, church cottages. You've also got St James's Church. Its spire is visible from various points. The orange is council-owned land, so it does include some of those areas around it. The moat does extend pretty much to the boundary here. You're now viewing a zoomed-in version of the landscape plan. So if you can imagine those St James's Church there and the scheduled monument here and the moat around there. This is the 25-metre setback of the boundary here, from the boundary to the edge of the solar panels. As part of the conditions that Justin's referred to, condition 5 does include measures to provide some kind of not screening per se. It's the words that Historic England uses, dapple planting, so interspersed around the area to interrupt views rather than to screen them entirely. The scheduled monument had a relationship with this land here originally as a agricultural land. I think it's maintained because that agricultural land isn't removed. It's just temporarily used for solar panels. The other condition they've asked for is, as part of the greenway improvements, is for interpretive boards along the greenway along the south to the south of the site. Those details will be dealt with as condition, but the intent is to bring understanding of the sites that at the moment are fairly well screened at the moment. You would have seen in the photographs that I showed. There is fairly significant landscaping along here. There's no real understanding of the scheduled monument of St James's Church is visible in wider views, but the interpretive boards will give some historic elements and provide some educational aspects to the greenway. So they're the benefits that the Historic England have requested. Whilst maintaining their objection, they weigh heavily in terms of the planning balance. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. That does help a lot to be able to see that step back and what's planned to put in the screening. I wonder, however, whether there isn't scope for rather more screening, especially for the moated heritage site. Seems to be a particularly fine example of a very distinctive kind of architecture. And there's an opportunity here, I would have thought, for additional planting along there. And that additional planting, of course, will add to the number of trees that are generating some of the benefits. So I would have thought that was a good thing to do over and above what we're currently planning. It would screen the site more effectively from the heritage assets. It's important to note that our own Conservation and Heritage Officer refers to the setting and views to and from the scheduled monument and the heritage buildings. So I think something that we could do that would reinforce that boundary planting would actually make me feel much more comfortable about supporting this application.
Sorry, go.
I was just going to say that, Stephen, you'd be proposing a new condition or amended condition for landscaping.
Well, I don't know whether it needs to be an amended condition. I just was asking really whether it could be incorporated within the existing conditions, additional planting along that boundary with the scheduled monument to green it more effectively. So it's not just a question of broken views, it's more effective screening, because I take your point entirely. This is a temporary measure, but 25 years is quite a long time. It'll certainly, I won't ever see that with back in agricultural land. So I'd be quite grateful if we could do everything we can to mitigate its impact now, rather than just wait for 25 years in the hope that everything will be fine then.
In answer to your request, the original application before it was amended did include much more denser landscape screening there. Historic England and Berkshire Archaeology have both opposed that because a couple of things. So it is the setting that they're wanting to retain. Screening it doesn't achieve benefits in terms of, it might screen it, but it doesn't actually improve the setting. It also has the potential to affect archaeological deposits underneath through the tree roots. And in addition, the setting was farmland, so they want to retain a degree of openness to the site. And fourthly, it's temporary in terms of the solar panels, but there's no intention for the trees or anything else like the greenway for them to be removed at 25 years. So that impact is permanent, which is not the intention of Historic England.
Okay, I could see that it's a rather pointless my pursuing this further, because very clearly I've invoked these consultees who've raised objections. I can hardly now myself try and override their objections by insisting on extra planting, which they not only have not requested, but have objected to. So I have to just drop that up here.
Thank you, Stephen. Right, let's go to other speakers. Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. I started off in exactly the same place as Stephen. I'm concerned about the fact that we're using prime agricultural land for this. I'm concerned particularly about the Historic England and the Berkshire Archaeology objections. I also, having seen the plan, I'm wondering where the boundary fence is going to go, and I just hope it's not going to go on top of the scheduled national monument or very close to it. I presume I could have some assurance that it's being set back. So I'm torn with this, because I certainly do not want to see houses on those fields, which might be the alternative. But it is a beautiful area. I mean, I've been there twice in last week to go and mull over the area, the surroundings and the buildings. I would hate to see them ruined by industrialization of the countryside, which is what these solar panels feel to a bit like me. So I'm really, really torn. I would prefer this than houses, but I would like some assurance about the landscaping. And I'd also like to understand what the officer comment, which is made a couple of times in here, which says, condition 28. So it says long-term planning for the use of the land is difficult. Decommissioning the site forms part of the application, and site remediation and any returning land to its original state forms part of condition 28. And then it says any change to this would be the subject to further review. What's that actually mean? Does that mean any change to shed condition 28 needs to come back to the planning committee? Or does it mean nothing in particular? What's the actual meaning of that? So I think my two questions are, what's the meaning of that? And could I have some reassurance over the fencing and where that is in relation to the scheduled monuments?
The fencing is 21 metres from the edge of the boundary. So the moat sits inside the boundary, sorry, outside the boundary. So it'd be maybe 22 metres. So the fence is 4 metres from the solar panels. That area will be planted with meadow and trees and grassland. In terms of condition 28, it's merely an acknowledgement that what we're doing is we want some assurances within the next 12 months, or within 12 months of the first generation of electricity, to know that what is going to happen at the end of the 25 years is that it can be returned to agricultural land. Whilst there's just a disclaimer there saying that a lot of the objections raised were saying that it's a long time away. It's almost permanent. What I'm attempting to say is that if circumstances do change, which is not what's proposed at the moment, then there is a mechanism for that to be reviewed, not necessarily at the planning committee, but it would be assessed again. It's not something that's just going to evolve over time to accommodate housing or anything like that. It's an assurance that at the moment agricultural land will be retained, and if it's not, it has to be reviewed as part of the planning process.
So I don't know if anybody else would like, I'd like some assurance that if it is going to be reviewed, it gets reviewed by the planning committee again. We're giving, I think, permission for this to be a solar farm, not for it to be a free-for-all of anything else that might then continue at the end of the 25 years. I don't know whether anybody agrees with me.
Sorry, Pauline. I think that's what exactly what Simon's saying. In effect, all that's being given permission is what's being applied for. It's just a note that anything else in the future that's different to what's being applied for, and anything else that doesn't return it back to its state at the end of that time period requires permission. So yes, there'll be an application for anything else, and yes, no doubt you would see it at committee.
Probably not me, but yeah. Sadly. Just coming to Rebecca's point, I wonder if we could ask Chris if we can reassure Rebecca that the permission to do the works on the road will not be given until there is a sensible alternative routing for the traffic out of Finchhamstead, even if it requires us to delay this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as Simon's mentioned, and the report shows, there's a couple of conditions in there that set out the construction management plan. So we wouldn't be proceeding to allow them to do any works until we had those all secured, and that would include any routing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Rochelle.
I'm just curious. Simon's favorite statement was, "You don't own the view. If you want the view, you buy the view." My question is, why does the Historic England have the ability to say, well, I don't want to see the solar farm there, but if we were building this next to a housing estate, it would be absolutely no problem whatsoever because we don't own the view. What's the difference? Why does a heritage asset have permission to keep the view, but an ordinary homeowner doesn't?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, you'll note that officers are proposing to approve the scheme, irrespective of the comments submitted by the consultee.
Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions, but I'd like to just begin by reiterating what Mr. Williams said and Stephen said about concerns relating to the fact that this is being called in, will be called in by the Secretary of State. So it's really important that whatever the decision, if the decision is to approve this application, that it is, the reasoning is as robust as possible so that the application is not overturned, if that's what the Secretary of State has the power to do. That does concern me. I do want to pick up on this issue about the Council Conservation Officer's objections to the proximity of the development to heritage site. Now, it was very interesting to hear the comments about screening not being appropriate or supported by the Conservation Officer, and I think by Historic England. I appreciate that. And I know it's not our task to redesign an application, but I do wonder, given the size of the site and the fact that there is other council-owned land adjacent to this, whether there's any scope at all for relocating some of the panels that are planned to be closest to the heritage sites to another part of the site. I noticed, for example, that there seems to be a fairly large area close to Bluebell Farm where the panels are not to be installed, but that might be part of the 5+ hectares of land that's going to be retained for farming. And then in a similar vein, on page 135, I note that Historic England's objection, they include their comment that the proposed mitigation, in their view, does not go far enough and that alternative solutions still exist that they say should be explored to minimise the identifiable harm. Could this still be done? Is my question. I'll ask one other question if I may, and then perhaps two more questions after the response. So the issue of potential, the issue of the current agricultural use of this land is something that I think many people consider to be very, very important indeed. I'm just wondering whether some of those concerns would be mitigated if we could get some sort of commitment, at least to explore as rigorously as possible the potential for dual use of the site. At the moment, there's no commitment for any dual use of the site, for example, possibly grazing sheep under and between the panels. And I think that assuming that WBC will remain the owner of the land, assuming that, and that it would be technically possible under the current plans, to have some form of dual agricultural and solar use. Is this something that could be pursued, and that perhaps WBC might pursue with current or potential future tenants, particularly with a view, to keeping that land back in agricultural use? I do have two other questions after this, though.
Okay, gets answers to
that. With respect to alternative areas within the site, the extent of the solar panels is fairly maximised in terms of it relating to its constraints. In the north of the site, there's ecological buffer. There's access required through the site. So within the site, it is mostly accommodated, covered by solar panels. There is through the site as well the greenway that provides a fairly wide route through the site to retain amenity for the users of the footpath. Beyond that, the negotiations in terms of the extent of alternative areas, the application was subject to a report that did look into alternative areas beyond Barkham area, and they were considered not suitable for the first phase of the solar panel implementation of the solar panels farm. I'm not sure if that's answered your question.
Sorry, but can I just add a bit to that, please? And as we're often told, we've got to consider the scheme in front of us, so we can't redesign it. But it's important to note that the scheme's already been amended to take account of some of these concerns. So it's been moved about 5 metres further away from the heritage assets already under this application, and about 5 hectares have been returned back to the farmer. So the actual developable area, I think, has gone down from something like 48 hectares to down to 43. So actually, there have been significant changes to the scheme to take account of consultee responses already.
There was a question of dual use as well.
In terms of the dual use, it hasn't been the primary driver in terms of it hasn't been taken into account. It's acknowledged that it can occur, but it is not the basis on which the application is justified. As the planning balance acknowledges that can occur in the future, that would weigh additionally in terms of the application.
Could that be an informative?
Yeah, so it is feasible, obviously. I think there are some implications for the ecological mitigation if it is used for grazing, but that could easily be worked through. But there's no harm in putting an informative on, suggesting that the applicant speaks to the farmer in terms of what could be done to the land in terms of grazing.
Do you want to propose that, Andrew? I'll second it.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to see that, and I think that it might help. Should when this goes to the Secretary of State, it might help to strengthen the application. If the borough was able to say that some of this land, the majority of the land, will continue in some form of agricultural use. My other two questions are.
Can I just, before we move off that, any member wish to oppose that? If not, then I think that's approved. So carry on, Andrew.
Yeah. My remaining two questions, I hope, are much simpler. There are references to glint and glare on page 138, but these seem to focus particularly on potential impacts of nearby residents. Have any issues of glint and glare from solar farms had impacts on road users in any parts of the country? I mean, this is way outside my comfort zone, I admit this, but is it something, you know, that has been actively considered with this application? Is there a risk to any road users? And then the final question is about the Greenway, and there are a few associated footpaths. And will the Greenway and the footpaths be fully accessible for the disabled?
Glint and glare is assessed in the documentation that they've provided. They did an assessment that included impacts on residences and road traffic. The primary road would be Barkham Ride, the impact being to the north of the site, and that was found to be acceptable. There is an additional comment in the report about footpath users, and that's addressed in a condition. But I don't think that it made a conclusion that because of the angle of the sun, the angle of the panels, that the impact is so minute that it is not an issue. In terms of public right of way, it is a greenway, so my understanding is that it'll be fully accessible. It is surfaced with permeable material. It's not gravel. It's not like a traditional footpath you'd find through those areas at the moment. It is a more stabilised surface to accommodate horse riders and continued use by other walkers.
Thank you. Is that it, Andrew? Sam.
Hi. Thank you, Chairman. My question is just regarding, first of all, I just want to say as a keen environmentalist, love solar farms, sounds a great idea. My only concern is that, by putting this here, you were taking out 52 hectares of primary agricultural land, or what I would look at or consider as being biodiverse land. That's 128.49 acres. Now, when you put that in perspective, it's a lot of land. What are you looking to do to sort of mitigate this land being turned into the solar farm? I mean, I think the fact that we're losing all this biodiversity makes me feel better that the 10,947 trees being planted, but is there anything else being done, or is there anything else that could be done that isn't being considered that could help mitigate this?
It's difficult to mitigate against the loss, but it's temporary loss. It is reversible at any time. It is feasible that it could be used for dual use. It is not 52 hectares in its entirety. A farm is retained, and it's up to the farmer to look into terms of what he wants to achieve on the remaining 5 hectares. There's also, I showed a map before that showed the areas around the farm that are retained. So this is a loss of agricultural land within the site itself. It's council owns farmland in and around the site that will be retained as well. And the report at paragraph 32 and 33 does attempt to weigh up all the actual other benefits. So the loss of agricultural land means a benefit for ecological benefit, for wildlife. It means cows are higher emitters of methane, so that's a reduction. That obviously needs to be weighed against other impacts like the increased food production elsewhere. And what the officer report attempts to do is to say that on balance that it is acceptable. It's not shying away from the fact there is a loss, but it is temporary.
Thank you. Right, Sam.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree. I think in principle, this sounds like a great plan. From my opinion, the way I like to think of it is, more for building more schools, but I wouldn't want to knock down hospital to build the school on.
Thank you. Gary. You're muted, Gary.
Sorry, I would say to Pauline, if it's best value land, it's unlikely to have houses on it. I never like the term that when on balance is used because it suggests grey areas. Mr. Williams and Stephen Conway made very, very good comments, and best value land, which the Secretary of State will obviously have a look at. I would suggest that if it's not, as Stephen used it, robust in all aspects, then it'll be a problem with the Secretary of State. I'd rather use the words whiter than white. If we look at, you did ask questions about was there any other suitable land that could be used of lower grade. And that was a question that was asked when Swallowfield Road was looked at. And the point put forward by the officers then was that it wasn't what we were determining. So we had to go along with it. But in this case, the officers have made, because it's best value land, the officers were really in a position to say if there was other more suitable land or not. And the other point on Swallowfield Road is that you looked at the site, and at that point in that application, you said the reason you were using that land was because it was not best value land. And now we've moved into a situation where we're saying best value land is okay. And as Mr. Williams also said, the farm is dead in the water if it's only got 5 hectares of land left to work. And so my point is that I would think this ought to be deferred until such time as all the issues are resolved. So when we send it to the Secretary of State, it can go to him with confidence. Thank you.
Of course, there will always be bad things because there clearly are environmental things which are not good about this. That's what the balance is all about. So not quite sure what.
Sorry, Chris. We're not considering the future of the farm. But although there's only 5 hectares here, the farm has another 18 hectares, as I understand it, on Rook's Nest Farm. So we're looking at 23 hectares overall. But that doesn't weigh significantly in your consideration. That's just for information.
Okay, Gary. Carl?
Yeah, thank you. As I said, I did say, I think it should be deferred till you get all the details right. I'm supportive of the concept, but I'm just concerned that the Secretary of State will see it differently when all the various objections that are made here are made to him.
Thank you, Gary. Carl?
Thanks. Yeah, I had a load of questions, but they've all but one have been answered. So I'll ask that one in a minute. So I'll just make some comments because I've been listening to everybody. Rochelle made the point about why Historic England pontificating on the view, and I think it mentions it in the report that it's all about the fact that although it's a particular site, a medieval farm site with a moat, the idea is that the actual view and the rural setting is part of that site. So it's a bit different from somebody's houses, unfortunately, in legislation. But so I think that's what's happening there, and I think officers accept that in the report. Yeah, I think this is obviously the proposal is contrary to several policies, no doubt about it. It is development in the countryside. On the other hand, as the report says, this kind of thing is only possible in the countryside. There's definitely problems with landscape views. I mean, I spend a lot of time looking at these views because I have young children which need to be exercised. So I spend a lot of time in Rook's Nest Wood Sang and California Country Park. And so I've seen a lot of these views and they're really nice and rural and lovely. And there's also quite valid objections, as we've said, on heritage and conservation grounds. And the loss of agricultural land is specifically against policy. So there's a lot of bad here. I think Mr. Williams made a really good point about the problem with this land being WBC land, and therefore that's a positive difference towards making this application. But if somebody else said, well, I own this land, we would not take that as a consideration in planning. It's entirely irrelevant. And I've often been confused about WBC's applications on its own sites, as you've heard tonight. So, it's not a surprise to see that. I'm going to talk about the climate emergency plan, how this relates to it, really. Councillor Murray spoke in favour of the application, and he knows what I think of the climate emergency plan. It is going to be short of its goal by 67,000 tonnes of carbon, and that's in the unlikely scenario that every target in it is achieved. And I think going back to the point Stephen made about making sure this is quite a robust application, I need to point out that the carbon target in the climate emergency plan for this solar farm is 7.9 kilotons of carbon per annum. That's in target RE 12.1. That's specifically for this solar farm. And I know there've been changes in size, but on page 108 and 114 of this report, it states that there'll be 92 kilotons of CO2 saved over 25 years. Now, those with good maths will know that equals 3.7 kilotons per annum, which is less than half of the target stated in the climate emergency plan. So you can see why I don't like the climate emergency plan. There's a lot of problems with it. Like I said, I know there's been changes on this application in terms of it's been reduced in size, but it hasn't been reduced in size by over 50%. And yet the target is less than 50% of what it should be. And he said also that it's 1% of our carbon footprint, and it isn't. So I think these are important things. That the application is correct. So I guess that won't be a big problem for the Secretary of State, but it's important that we kind of make sure we're doing the right things. There's a resident objection mentioned on page 99, and it really got me thinking. They said meeting energy goals should not be used to justify the wrong development in the wrong location. And I think I agree with that. I think we'll all agree with that. But I think the question for us is this the wrong development in the wrong location? And what does the right development in the right location look like? And does it exist there? And I think the most important factor for me is, can we wait for them to turn up? You know, alternative sites haven't been identified. And I don't see a stampede of non-WVC landowners coming forward with plans for solar farms on their property for us to pick a better site. So, you know, I wish we had time to kind of go into this, but, you know, it's almost too late and we really need to get on with it. And one of the other things is that several people have mentioned, this is a temporary permission. So it's a very long permission as well, 25 years, but it is still temporary and it could be reverted. My question, the one remaining one I've got after everybody else has answered, that's mine. The lighting, coming back to something that Rebecca said, it's conditioned as sensor lighting. And I just wonder how that works in the context that there are going to be some very large animals possibly roaming around. Badgers, foxes, you know, are the sensors sensitive enough to avoid that? I mean, it's a rural location. We don't want lamps flashing off in the middle of the night in what is a dark area. So I just wonder whether conditioning that as sensor is a good idea. Obviously, you don't want somebody leaving a light on all night either after they're visiting. But you know, my thoughts would be we better to have them manually controlled. But that's some. So that's the question on that one. Then.
Thank you, Carl. Gary, could you turn your camera up, please? Okay. Did you want to reply to your CO2 figures being you thought wrong?
Yeah, I just like acceptance. That's the correct. I mean, the application is correct, so it's kind of irrelevant to the application really. But you know, if we're saying that this is going to be 1% Gregor's submission, I don't know if those things go forward to the Secretary of State in these instances, and if so, that is incorrect.
Okay, but we're getting on to the sensor lighting.
Your point is noted. I think in terms of the review of the details that are submitted, I think we can look into that in further detail. My understanding is that the substation and the 5 transformer buildings are the only sites that are going to be lit, and they'll be fenced. So that does limit larger wildlife from getting into those areas, and they would be the kind of wildlife that would activate a sensor. In terms of being not censored, that might be an alternative that the committee might want to entertain in terms of reducing the amount of times that the sensor is activated, given the fact that the amount of times that somebody is going to be accessing the site during the nighttime periods would be fairly limited. I'll take that.
What do you want to propose?
I was just going to say that I'm okay with that now. I kind of assumed that the fence around the site was the fence around the site. If the actual substations are going to be individually fenced without badger gates and so on, as per like the rest of the fencing, then that solves that problem.
Okay. I haven't got anybody else down to talk to speak. Does anybody have an alternative proposal? Yes.
I did, as you perhaps will have gathered from what I said earlier on. I was feeling that deferral might have been the best course. However, having heard the responses of the officers, I'm not convinced that there is any kind of robust justification I could give for deferral. So I think most of my concerns have been addressed, or addressed as much as I think it's ever going to be possible to address them. So I'm not sure that there is probably any real mileage in proposing a deferral. I'm not sure it would actually achieve what I'd hoped it might achieve. So I'm now, I'm not going to persist with that suggestion.
Ms. Williams, do you have your hand up?
I do. Could I just make two quick comments?
Yes.
One is, I might be wrong, but on the comment on sheep on the farm, my understanding was that council had said to the farmer that sheep would not be allowed to be on the farm. So that's one thing to probably mop up. And the second comment is, and look, I'm not a planner, and it might not be relevant, but I'm just thinking, if I was the Secretary of State, and I'm not qualified here, but this argument of significant benefit to climate change, on top of, if you think about the big renewable schemes that are in the offing, one is Dogger Bank, which is an offshore wind farm, which is going to power, I think it's 5 million homes. And the other one is the nuclear Hinkley Point C, which is going to power 7 million homes. That's 12 million homes. So that's probably 20% of the UK population. And that's on top of what other projects and existing projects that are operational. I just make a point as an amateur here of this argument of significant benefit to climate change when you talk about 100+ acres of something that's not whiter than white, to produce something for 5,000 homes is just tiny. So I just make that as a statement.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we can go to the recommendation. We have Andrew's informative on dual use. I think that was the only one. There are some changes to conditions in the supplementary planning agenda, but these are these all technical? I've forgotten your name. Simon, sorry.
Sorry, I missed that. What was the question? Sorry.
Just looking at the changes in the supplementary planning agenda to the conditions. You said they were technical, I think. Is that right?
They deal with the timing of when information comes forward. So a lot of it was specified as pre-commencement, and there's been negotiations since the agenda was set to allow some submission of the details at a later stage. That would allow the solar farm to the construction of it to come online much quicker than it otherwise would.
Okay, thank you. And members happy understanding those modified conditions are? If so, can we go to the recommendation then in view of the change conditions and the informative that's been added? Let's say those in favour of approving this application, please. Any against? Any abstaining? Who? Morning. Okay, that's approved. Thank you very much. And we go on to the Fish Ponds Close. This has no representations. I hope we can get through this one fairly quickly, please. Baldeep, good evening.
Evening, Chair. I'm just loading up the presentation. Can we all see this?
Can you make the screen full screen, please? Was that F1?
Sorry, thank you.
Excellent.
This is the application for Fish Ponds Road. It's for the proposed erection of 2 industrial buildings comprising a total of 4 units, together with associated infrastructure, parking, landscaping, following the demolition of 2 existing industrial buildings on site. This is a location plan of the site. It's located off Molly Millers Lane and is within the Fish Ponds Industrial Estate. Is the proposed site plan. So the proposal will comprise of 2 separate industrial buildings, which in themselves will comprise of 4 separate units. So there'll be 2 units per building, with associated car parking to the front and soft landscaping. The adjoining sites are industrial and with residential dwellings to the rear. This is building A. As you can see, it will be 2 stories high with a portal frame construction. There will be a mixed palette of materials which will result in quite a contemporary design within the area. And this is the rear elevations of building A. These are the elevations of building B. Again, it's 2 stories high. And will be a portal frame construction, and again it will comprise of a mix of materials. These are the floor plans for building A. So the ground floor will be a core amenity space, and on the upper floors there will be office space. And ground B will have a similar layout with the core amenity spaces on the ground floor and office space on the first floor. The 3D visual provided by the applicant showing the proposed building on site. So this in particular will be building A, and this slide is a 3D visual again provided by the applicants of building B. This is the existing site with the 2 buildings currently there and with car parking to the front. Subject to the legal agreement and conditions set out in the officer report and members update, this application is recommended for approval.
Thank you. We have no speakers, so it's no local member. Members' comments, please. No one. So we'll go to the vote. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, I know you're rushing this through. That's fine because it doesn't look very controversial. I just want to know what's the difference in height between these proposed units and what's already there, because there's talk of overshadowing, and I'm a bit concerned about. I think it's 1 and 2 Oakland Drive, and specifically because of the back-to-back distances I mentioned again. And I know that if it's residential, we've got a minimum of 22 metres, and one of these is 21. So I don't know if that's policy compliant or not.
So in terms of the back-to-back separation distances. Obviously policy that's mainly from residential to residential. So in this case, to the eaves, building A will be 8.6 meters to the eaves, and it will have a maximum ridge height of 11.2. Now, given the distances and the fact that the building will be set away from the rear boundary, don't feel that any overshadowing will be detrimental to these residential properties. I mean, the report also points out any overshadowing that may occur is to the rear areas of the gardens and not the habitable rooms. So we are content that the amenities of these residential properties will still be protected.
Okay, only one comment I want to make as well is just that this is the applicant that's putting in double the EV spaces. So I hope they do that, even though we've only held them to 4. Thanks.
No.
Gary.
Just to say, I did visit the site, and the report's very good, and I'm very pleased to see in paragraph 46 the retention of the trees. So I've got no difficulty with it all. So I would be voting for it had I been in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Carl's not. No. We can go to the recommendation on page 176. There's amendment to condition 2 in the supplementary planning agenda. Is that the only amendment? I think it is. Anyway, you've got it in front of you. So can I see those in favour of approving this application, please? Thank you. That's unanimous. How many votes? That's 8 for, and that's it. I don't know, the 8 members voting. Right, we go on to 5 Shepherds Avenue. Baldy, if it's you again, please.
Yeah. Sorry, just uploading the presentation again. So this is for the application of 5 Shepherds Avenue. It's the full application for the change of use of amenity land to residential with the formation of associated hard standing, which is a retrospective application. This is the location plan of the site. So 5 Shepherds Avenue is located within a cul-de-sac of London Road and Early. And the area of hard standing is outlined within the red line, which is not within the applicant's ownership. This is a plan of the site. The area of tarmac hard standing has been installed outside of the existing driveway to allow for easier access to and from the properties for members of the applicant's family. This is a photograph of the existing tarmac hard standing on site. And this is the drain that has been installed on the existing driveway, and it's connected to the main drainage system of the property. Aerial imagery of Shepherds Avenue. As you can see, there is a mixture of other hard standings and greenery within the street scene. And subject to the conditions set out in the officer report, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you very much. Right, speakers. Tim Marsh, first of all. Please, Mr. Marsh, good evening.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, committee. This is not adopted land. In fact, I visited Shepherds Avenue last week together with Councillor Shahid Yunus to look at whether it needs to be adopted, but it is owned by Woking Borough Council. Now, we did speak to some of the residents, one of whom had been there for 50 years. Significantly, the residents stated that the strip of land from their property, which led to the road, had to be maintained by the owners in the street under covenant regarding their terms of ownership. Now, there was evidence that this had taken place, with the wide grass verges each mowed by the respective owners, apart from a property which was currently vacant. Now, paragraph 9 on page 221 of the officer's report states that numbers 4, 7, 9 and 11 have paved their driveways. This is true, but none have tarmacked over their respective grass verges, as has happened at number 5. Now, we've seen the Google Earth view. The brown areas are currently green, certainly bright green last week. I don't know whether they are now. It's been a bit of sunshine. So there's quite a lot of grass there. Now, the following concerns come to mind. If this was approved and the road was later adopted, would this restrict Woking Borough Council's ability to widen the road or landscape the area? Another concern is if this application was to be approved, would this this would surely risk further piecemeal development by neighbours on the grass verges. Would an approval set a precedent elsewhere in Woking? Can I, or anyone else, now tarmac the grass verge outside my property with relative impunity? Now, there are two further issues to consider: drainage and appearance. Drainage: the officer's report says that the drainage provision is acceptable. Now, I have to bear in mind that building regulations expressly forbid rainwater runoff from within a curtilage of a property being fed into a public drain. Now, has this drain been checked that it works? The reason for querying it is that none of the other drains we saw worked. They were all blocked and reportedly have never been cleared out. And more secondly, where does the water go? Is it a soakaway, or does it add water to be processed by water treatment plants? Now, water treatment plants frequently allow untreated sewage to go into rivers. Should we knowingly add to this problem? Appearance: does tarmacking over the grass verge matter? Now, Strategic Policy CP3 states that development must be without detriment to the amenities of adjoining land users and occupiers. This proposal does not comply because to omit all soft landscaping at number 5 has changed the visual green landscape amenity of the grass verges and leaves an exposed barren tarmac, expanse of tarmac. Now, there is a site block plan which was shown, and it does say in one point that the existing planted soft landscaping is kept and maintained within the existing front garden, and you saw from the photograph which was shown that just does not exist.
Could you come to a
So,
conclusion, Mr. Marsh,
thank
please?
you very much.
Oh, have you finished?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry for interrupting you.
So this is surely a plan for refusal.
Okay, thank
on
you.
Secretary Land. Thank you very much.
And now, Mr. Armin, who is from 5 Shepherds Avenue, sent in a statement which I'm going to read out to all the committee members. Good evening, hope you are all well. 5 Shepherds Avenue is not buying the property at the front. Neither are we planning to buy it. We are fully aware that the front bit is not a part of our property, even though we were not told this when we were purchasing the property. The only reason we have put concrete at the front is due to having broken concrete. We have only refurnished it due to having a disabled family member living in this property. She suffers from severe problems, including stroke, blood pressure, diabetes, being paralysed from one arm, difficulty walking, and she is partially blind from one eye with hearing problems. She has a disabled badge as well as all the evidence needed regarding this matter, which has been submitted in the application. The image on Google is not the way we purchased our property 4 to 5 years back. Before, the area was tarmacked. It was in real bad condition. More than half of the area was uneven and the concrete area was full of potholes. There was a public path in the middle of my driveway and tarmac area, which was all broken and in a bad condition. I, along with my family, have fallen a few times along that area, which shows how dangerous the area was. However, we still did not claim anything from the council for this. In addition to the the concern about other people's opportunities, we are not the only residents with concrete at the front of the property. The majority have tarmac. We are being targeted all the time about our property, even though we try to make the back safer for other residents to walk past. We are not stopping anyone to use the path. We are the ones who are keeping up the maintenance, as we have spent nearly over £3,000 for the safety of all the residents, including ourselves and our disabled family member, even though the land is not ours. Finally, we do have a drainage system, and compared to before, where the water was gathered up, now there is no longer this problem and the water easily flows. The drainage is connected to the main drainage system, and as you know, the drainage is right outside our house. The water never stops on the tarmac and driveway because of the slope. We, as the residents of 5 Shepherds Avenue, should get appreciated for spending our own money to not only secure the land for the public, but also our disabled family member who has tripped there several times, who has had a stroke and can hardly walk without support. This is all in the supporting statement. Once again, we've only tidied it up from a professional company, not taking authority over it. We provided the official certificate to the council with 10-year guarantee. That's the end of Mr. Armin's statement. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Shirley Boyd, local member for Bournemouth and Whitegates.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me. I would just like to say that in December last year, an application to vary a previously imposed landscaping condition was approved. The reason for this variation was to allow room for a disabled parking space for the elderly resident. I'm therefore slightly confused as this application seeks to create further disabled parking. Why is there need for a second disabled parking space, especially one which is a considerable distance from the front door? The land in question, as already stated by Tim, is amenity land belonging to WBC, but there is also a footpath running between the amenity land and the boundaries of the dwellings on both sides of Shepherd's Avenue. This tarmacking takes no account of this. The report states that other residents carried out similar work, and this is true, but to a much lesser extent. We see mainly standard width driveways across the grass, or in one instance, a full width hardstanding using permeable materials which will be easily reversible. My primary concerns, however, are the loss of all the greenery at the front of number 5, both inside and outside the curtilage. This is contrary to CP3. If this application is approved, a precedent will be set, giving every resident of Shepherd's Lane carte blanche to do the same thing, resulting in a barren landscape where car is king. Furthermore, many roads in my ward feature larger than average grass verges, which belong to the Borough Council. If this application is approved, then what is to stop everyone tarmacking over theirs to create additional parking? Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, depending on whether you can answer any of those points that have been raised, please.
I think Chris will answer the drainage questions, and I can answer about the variation application. As far as I'm aware, the variation application was for landscaping only. That doesn't make a mention of a disabled car parking space. The one that was approved in December. That would be my only point on the landscaping part.
I was questioning whether does the drainage actually work? It's been approved by the drainage officer.
To be fair, Chris, I don't believe that's been confirmed. Other than obviously it's installed, it's been connected, and it's surface water is running off it at the moment. And obviously, if it's not fully flowing that way, then anything will obviously fall out onto the grass verges to the side, which will obviously permeate into the ground as it once did. I think there's a few things we need to clarify just to be on the, I guess, the safe side. This is completely different. So whilst the council may own the land, it may be owned by property, which is completely different to any land that has highway rights upon it. So all I'm aware of is obviously this piece of land does not form part of the local highway network that is adoptable and maintainable at public expense. How that piece of land that obviously is referred to is maintained, I think has been mentioned. There's obviously some lease or tenant agreement where obviously the frontage residents maintain it at some sort of cost, but it's not public highway, and nobody would be able to work in a public highway or tarmac this or any part of the highway without significant repercussions if they did it unlawfully without full permission from the highway authority. And any application would need to be done officially and signed off by the highway authority and undertaken by an approved contractor with Streetworks permissions to grant them to do so.
Thank you.
Chair, could I just come back on something that Baldeep said, please, regarding the previous application? And that is that it actually says here, I've got the previous application in front of me, on the application form, it says, we wish to change condition 6 and reduce the amount of proposed landscaping as first envisaged to the front of the property due to the disability of an elderly resident being cared for and living at the property, where also safe mobility access is needed at all time and in order to allow for car parking for a disabled person, as well as if an emergency ambulance vehicle to be able to come onto the driveway. And that, I think, is why the landscaping was approved. And I certainly, the removal of the landscaping condition was approved. I certainly did not object to that when this came up before the committee last year, because I felt that the needs of a disabled person probably came before the needs of trees and bushes. Thank you.
Thank you. Come to members now. Carl, local member.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a few questions on the report, really. In the enforcement history, which is on page 218, all 3 investigations mentioned have a final action of case closed. That isn't very descriptive, and I'd just be interested to know what action was actually taken on those cases. I've got a couple of other questions, but I guess we can try them one at a time. It'd be easier, won't it?
Yeah, that's fine. So the way that enforcement works, if we do get an application submitted under an enforcement investigation, we can essentially close the case. Sorry, I should have pointed that out in the report. That's why a lot of them do say case closed in terms of the resolution, because a valid application was submitted to obviously remedy the breaches.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks for that. That makes sense. On page 221, paragraph 10, it states that no planning permission exists for the paved driveways already present in the street on WBC-owned verges, and it says they would be immune from enforcement. Can you explain why?
Yeah, having a look through the council's own GIS imagery and Google Earth imagery, the hard standing that has been installed by the neighbouring properties have been installed over a period of over four years. There is one in particular that we think is at least 10 years, based on the time limit under, I think, section 172 of the Town and Country Planning Act. These would be immune from enforcement action.
Okay, thanks for that. That's perfect. And the only other thing to mention, well, I've got some comments, actually, but the plan of the site on page 223 has a point that says, that points to the side of the house, says existing planted soft landscaping kept and maintained. And this refers to the landscaping on the right as we look at the house of the paved driveway, the actual one that the applicant owns, not the tarmac one we're talking here. And the photo in the presentation clearly shows that landscape isn't there. So that landscaping isn't there. So I'm just interested to know, because I think that was conditioned. And I'm just wondering how that disappeared, why it's not there, should it be there? Clearly it's not this particular bit of land, but it does relate to the point that people are complaining about a landscape issue.
Yeah, I had the site visit photographs, I have to admit, were taken before the application of the variation for the soft landscaping. There is a chance that the owners have implemented it. Unfortunately, an up-to-date visit wasn't taken.
Okay, but let's say then that they should have implemented it then, even if they haven't. They'll have to. Okay. I'm just going to just a few comments really. I recognise that the land ownership isn't the consideration here, and we're nearly 3 hours in, so I don't suppose many people from Wokingham are still watching. But if they are, and they've all got grass verges outside their properties, I'm thinking, oh, I'd like to tarmac that. Are we setting a big precedent by doing this here? And what Chris just said about the highway would be a problem. I'm absolutely sure that's true. My question would be, where does the highway end then? Are these verges included in it, or are they not? And if they're not, there's literally no point there. I mean, people could literally tarmac them and it wouldn't be a problem as long as they're not going into the highway. So I'd like that answered. Just make a comment as well. I don't think there was any need here for the applicant to tarmac the entire width of the access. All the others that have done any kind of driveway have done it partly, and to do it over the their entire our entire frontage seems a bit over the top, and I think they should have left some grass and some greenery, and that would have given them the access that they say they need. You know, that size of tarmacking looks to me like it's for parking, unless they're driving. I don't know what's that wide, but I don't think anything's that wide. They drive a couple of Humvees, perhaps. And I think it does make a difference in the way it looks in the street scene. I think it is detrimental. It doesn't accord with the other driveways. You know, I'm minded to refuse this. However, there's a point that the Residents Association make, suggesting that we have a condition for soft landscaping at the boundaries of the tarmac, if there's any boundary left. And I think that's sensible if we are going to approve it.
Do you want to propose a refusal? Carl?
Not at this point. No, I think that, we let people speak if anyone else wants to speak first. But just to have that question answered by Chris, really, where does the highway end? And I guess it depends.
You're right, it does. Obviously, everybody who purchases the property will get their deeds, which obviously show the extent of their boundary. And so predominantly fronting any road fronting a property generally is highway up to their property boundary. I think it's quite clear, most people know the extent of the highway, whether there's a grass verge or a footpath. And yeah, I mean, to date, this doesn't typically happen. We very rarely get anybody, I don't recall anybody in the borough going out and surfacing a verge. There are standards they have to apply for, and we have inspectors out there who obviously pick up on people who may do works like this. As I say, in this case, it's not public highway. It's the public highway starts, obviously, of the road. I think it's the A4 that obviously turns, the junction that turns into Shepherd's Avenue. That's where the public highway stops in this case, and the rest of that is private under properties ownership, which may be confusing to some as it is council, but as I said, there is a difference between property land and highway land.
Thanks for that, Chris. That is confusing to me, but I get the point that if it's a normal highway road, then the highway carries on up to the point of the property, so that's fine. Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks, Carl. On to Gary.
Oh, thank you. I'm confused by the point on highways as well. I did go out to the site and have a look at it, and I must say it was quite difficult to find. And what I did notice, the front of the property is, there were 2 cars within the property curtilage, and there were 2 on the hard standing outside it. There was drop curb to the left, but not to the right, so you couldn't drive up into the middle area. So it looked to me as if there was access through the existing drop curb, and there was room for 4 cars on the site. As for landscaping, I didn't really see any landscaping. There were some trees to the right, but I thought they belonged to the adjoining property, and there were just a few weeds in the ground. So I can understand other residents wishing to have some sort of the area, some landscaping there, which I think there clearly isn't. If anyone also went to the site, they would understand the points I'm trying to make. The drainage is another issue. It's no point in it saying that the owner of the property is saying we put in drainage, it'll drain the water away. We really need to know where it goes, and it's the officers are duty bound to actually inform us, is the drainage to standard, and does the drainage go to where it should go, and does it not go anywhere else? So I'm mindful of the issues, but I think it's not as straightforward as the report says. But as I'm not there, I don't have the vote, so I'll leave it up to you illustrious members.
Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reiterate with Chris, this is unusual because the road is not adopted, the road in front of the houses, and therefore it does not set a precedent as far as I understand. Chris, could you confirm with any other grass verges which people might want to put a drive on, as we've seen in other places around the borough? There are a lot of grass verges like that. I just want to be sure that we're absolutely crystal clear this doesn't set a precedent.
Definitely not. It's completely, as I say, unfortunately, it is owned by the council, as I say, in a different arm. If this was privately owned by anybody else, again, it's a private matter. And this does come back to the drainage, whilst it's understood that there is no drainage issues there from what we understand so far, but it is all private. If somebody surfaced, put a new patio in their garden, we're not going to inspect what they've done. If it's draining and it has an effect on their own private land, then that's obviously their doing, and they obviously need to rectify that accordingly. But as far as we're concerned, this one, it does connect into something. It is obviously discharging, and it doesn't appear to be affecting any of the adjoining neighbours, which obviously would be a concern for them.
Thank you. And the other question, which is a minor one, I'm sure the planning officer said that the drain at the back of the patio discharged into the public drain. I thought that wasn't allowed. I'm not sure whether that's a planning issue, or whether it's a building regs issue. I guess it would depend on who owns the drain it's discharged into, and ultimately where that drain then discharges to. If it's a soak away that's at the end of the road, again in private ownership, then it's a private drain and a private connection. It's down to them entirely. But obviously, if it has an outfall into a river, which I'm not sure what is along that location, you've got the railway further up, so you're going to have an embankment that will obviously slope down towards the properties at some point there. It really depends on where it outfalls to be fair. I was wondering if it was connected indirectly to the main drain for the house.
If it is, then obviously that's again kind of a private matter for whoever takes their surface water in those locations. And obviously people do pay for surface water. You pay a fee to obviously your provider to have surface water discharging into them. Where you obviously get a discount if you have a water butt, for example. So again, it's not, I don't think it's a planning matter, but obviously it could have an effect on them privately, which obviously they need to rectify.
Thanks.
Thank you. On to Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I have a number of questions, if I may. We've been told that the fact that this is an unadopted road does have implications, for this application, but it's also been said that this doesn't set a precedent for grass verges in front of other homes. But my understanding is that we do have quite a significant number of unadopted roads, in the borough, and I would be worried, that it could set a precedent for quite a large number, of properties in the future. So if we could just clarify that issue, and kind of related to that, I'm just really interested to understand better how common it is for WBC to receive retrospective applications for changes of use from what in this case is a fairly large piece of amenity land to residential. And when this happens, what are the usual factors for evaluating such applications? So is this commonplace? And what sort of factors, should we be considering? The issue of drainage does concern me. The photos that we were shown showed a drain hard up against the wall of the home. I'm assuming that is the only drain. And that seems to be draining largely the paved area. But I think this application is talking about the tarmacked area, and we haven't heard anything at all about drainage from the tarmacked area. So if that could be clarified. And then as Carl alluded and Shirley alluded, would it actually be, the application is seeking to tarmac over the whole width of what was the verge. I understand the reasoning that's being given for this, to ensure access to a disabled family member, and I understand that this is a material consideration. But could this same level of access be achieved in a way that we would reinstate at least some significant soft landscaping? And if that is technically possible, wouldn't it significantly reduce the arguments in favour of approving the application?
Officer, please.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Just on the precedent point, I think you'd said it's a rare occurrence, and it is very rare. I don't think it sets a precedent for other roads, and I think each one is judged on their own individual merits. If you look at the character of this area, where you've had a number of properties that have already done it, the part of the character is that there are these wider areas of hard standing on the frontage. So I don't think it sets a precedent. I think it's acceptable in these terms. The drainage points, I think Chris has broadly covered. I would say we're sort of, when we're talking about drainage issues and land ownership issues, we're kind of confusing what we're actually considering tonight, really, which is just the application. We don't need to worry about the land ownership. And in terms of the drainage, it may or may not be acceptable. You don't have to determine that tonight. And if it fails, it looks like it runs down into the house. So I'm sure it's in their interest to make sure it doesn't fail. And then I think the other point was, could the access be made narrower? Feasibly, it could be made narrower, but the application is for the access width that we've got in front of us. If you consider it acceptable, that's fine. I appreciate that there's a change because it looks new, but from looking at the aerial photos, a number of other properties have done this, and it looks like it settles in over time. So I think the impact is limited.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, fine. Anyone wish to propose an alternative? Oh, sorry, Stephen.
Thank you. It was just a small point, and this may be a further reason to regard this as not setting a precedent. But my understanding is what's unusual about this is we have a private street where normally all of those residents on it would have severally and collectively a responsibility to maintain the road and all of the things off the road. But on this occasion, we've got a private street, but with the verges owned by the council. And that, I think, is probably extremely unusual. Yeah. I would imagine that is unusual. Because a private street, normally all of that land would be jointly and severally owned. So it may be that there are very few instances in the borough where we've got a private street with the council owning the verges. I don't know, but I would quite be interested to know whether that's the case. It does, on the face of it, look very odd that the council is allowing a piece of its own land to be built on in this way. And I do share the concerns that people have expressed about whether it's really necessary to actually pave over the whole of this. And it's not entirely clear to me that the precedent that seems to have been established by other properties doing something similar is one that we should be comfortable with, given that the only reason no action's been taken against those is because of the time having expired, effectively, where action could be taken.
But they do, in effect, have planning permission, I think.
Well, I don't think they in effect have planning permission because nothing can be done to stop it because it's too late.
So that's a precedent for this application.
Except this is a formal application, yeah.
Carl?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that I won't be making a motion to refuse. I don't think I'd have the support anyway, although I'm still going to vote against it. But I would just ask whether it's reasonable, actually, that the Residents Association, I mentioned it earlier on, but the Residents Association saying that they would like to see a condition for soft landscaping at the boundaries of this tarmac. Is that reasonable? If that's reasonable, I think we should do it, and I'll be happy to propose that. But if it's not reasonable, it's not. Yeah.
Not a comment on that, Chris.
Sorry, were you referring to, well, when you say soft landscaping, what were you meaning, Carl? Because obviously,
I mean something at the side of the tarmac. Obviously, this is retrospective. So if they were putting this in as a normal application, we'd probably say, well, you know, you've got your access, and then there should be a little bit of greenery either side of it. That's probably what we would do, but which is similar to the rest of the street.
Yeah, I can't see.
Reasonable.
I was trying to see the photos to see whether or not the surfacing went up and abutted the adjoining neighbour's surfacing, because yeah, you're right. I mean, but yeah, it really depends. I haven't got a comment. As I say, ultimately, I think as I think Justin mentioned, ultimately it's a private landowner matter. Yes, the application's in. I think I've kind of expressed the point from a highways perspective, but ultimately, I think in terms of the application, I think the planning officers have set out their kind of stall on it. But it's ultimately down to the property owner if they are sufficient and happy with obviously what's been placed on their land, and for them to deal with it as a private matter, whether that's legal or whether they're happy to let it be. But I think just having a quick look, I was looking at the photos just to confirm for you, the drainage, the driveway does fall towards the property, and it does appear that they have like an ACO drain, which is obviously your surface drain running about a metre setback from the house. So it's block paving, which would have some sort of permeability anyway, through whatever type of granular material we've obviously compacted between the blocks, and then obviously the drain will pick up and capture. And it's not going to be a significant runoff from that. It's difficult to tell from the pictures whether this tarmacked area, whether that falls to the property or whether it stays within the verge, which is, again, private property. But obviously that would have all maintained and drained itself, whether it had been permeable through the verge or whether it were fallen into the small carriageway. And that will remain kind of relatively unchanged, other than obviously a slight increase in surface water capture, and then obviously directing it either into the carriageway or into the grass verge on its side, depending which way that they've rolled the tarmac. And I think just while we're here, just to kind of, I will just present my screen so you can just see how this does kind of stand out as a, I don't think it does, I personally don't believe it sets a precedent. My computer's being a bit slow. Let me know if you can see that.
Not yet.
Does that come through?
Yeah, they're getting there. Nice picture of you.
Nobody needs that. So what's come through? I can't see. Is it showing that being shown? What can you see?
Yeah, better.
Yep.
So everything in yellow, as you can see on this plan, is adopted highway. And you can see it's predominantly at the frontage of all the properties. You get a few little occasions where you get the little private links or fruit. And this one here, this larger one, which actually is a very wide verge, is the private road that we're referring to. It's very unusual. Obviously up here, you get the kind of the longer sections of road, which are the business park. And that's quite usual for those kind of things to be unadopted or to maintain private. But yeah, this is the link here, and you can see it's quite uncommon, and it's quite clear what is public highway, usually right up against the frontage of the property boundaries, which people will know when they purchase their property from their deeds. And I say it's not something that commonly happens, and I think Justin can advise, but I think it is more of the applications in front of you to discussion about the change of use, but in terms of whether it can legally take place, that's a legal matter between the tenant and the owner of the property.
Okay, just going back to I was talking about the condition. Sounds unreasonable then, but taking Chris's point, the landowner has the legal kind of ownership, so therefore that's WBC. So perhaps an informative here, saying that we think WBC should, we would suggest they arrange with the applicant for a landscaping to be put in at the side, and it's not obviously it doesn't have to actually happen, but that's the will of the committee maybe.
Well, we could minute something. I tried this before. If you put an informative on, that goes to Mr. Armin rather than the cast.
Yeah, I mean, any informative.
We minute your point.
Yeah, I just want to make the point to that we'd like to soften that, and therefore
we have to have your point minuted.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll be happy with that.
Have we got it? Yeah, thanks. Can we go to the recommendation then? On page, first page, 217. Those in favour of approving, please show. And those against? One against. Two against. Abstentions? 1 abstention, 2 against, 5 in favour. Thank you. I'd like to propose that we extend till 11 o'clock as it's now 17 minutes past 10 if that's necessary. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Carl. Those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous 8 votes. Right. Okay, last one is Lord Harris Court, Mole Road, Sindlesham. And it's Natalie Jarman. Sorry for keeping you so late.
Good evening. I'll just put the presentation on the screen. Hopefully you can see that. This application relates to Lord Harris Court and Mole Road, Sindlesham. Planning permission is sought for the installation of a non-return valve and a 24-hour storage cesspit to store effluent. The application is made retrospectively. This is a location plan. Lord Harris Court includes an existing care centre and is located on the northern side of Mole Road, opposite Bearwood Recreation Ground. The proposed development is located adjacent to the entrance road, which you can hopefully see here, into Lord Harris Court. Planning permission was granted in October 2019 for the erection of a new 45-bedroom care home phase 1 and 60 assisted living apartments, which forms phase 2. Construction of the new care home phase 1 has begun. This aerial photograph shows the site before that construction work commenced. This is the care home here. This is the location of the proposed development, and this is the area where the care home is currently being constructed. This plan shows the master plan for the site. So the care home as it is at the moment is at the rear of the site, but the new care home would be located at the front of the site, and the location of the proposed development is in the corner here. This plan shows the location of the proposed tank in relation to the new care home and the road, and this is Mole Road along here. The care home will discharge to the foul drainage sewer system. The proposed valve and tank will be used if there is a blockage in the system. There's no objection to the application from Thames Water, the council's drainage officer, or environmental health. This plan shows the location of where the tanker would empty the tank from if required. The proposal is considered to be acceptable in highway safety terms. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the report.
Thank you, Natalie. We have one speaker, local member, Councillor Paul Fishwick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this application. This is a large development as indicated on the master plan that gained planning approval in 2019. This is not an isolated dwelling in rural countryside, but a large development adjacent to a residential area that must be connected directly to a foul water sewage system that already exists in Mole Road. The developers claim that Thames Water system is blocked. However, they have not provided any evidence, and residential properties nearby on Mole Road, in Mayfields, or at Winnersh Parish Council facilities directly opposite this site have not had any issues with foul sewage systems. In July 2021, during the latter stages of the phase 1 part of this development, a cesspit was installed in the ground, the subject of this application, and has been used on a regular basis. I know this as a local resident, along with other residents, as each time they empty it, there is a strong smell of raw sewage, and I have received numerous complaints about it. Photographic evidence has been taken and submitted to planning officers of different vehicles parked right on the junction of the access road to Lord Harris Court and the B3030 Mole Road, emptying the cesspit and not in the location just showed by the officer. This creates a road safety issue for access and egress from Lord Harris Court and Sindlesham House, and the pipes from the tanker to the cesspit run over the footway, therefore closing it for use. Pedestrians crossing the junction are obstructed from view of approaching drivers by the tanker. A cesspit is not an acceptable alternative. This application must be refused and I strongly object. And I hope that the committee consider the points I've raised to make their decision this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Natalie, can you get some answers to the points that Paul has raised there, please?
Yeah, the comments that I would make in response is that construction is still taking place of the care home. So that might explain the position of the tanker. And also that the care home will still be connected to the foul drainage system. And this proposal is in addition to that. Hope that clarifies.
Well, Paul said there was a smell. Is there a smell?
We've had consultation response from the Environmental Health Officer, and that's detailed within the report. And it goes back to the point that it isn't, the care home isn't just being serviced by the proposed tank. It's in addition to the foul drainage system.
Okay, let's move on. Rochelle, local member.
Yes, well, since it's obviously in use at this point, and there hasn't been any blockage in the drainage, I don't understand why they actually need it at all. Because if it's an emergency thing, why is it an emergency for the last year? What's wrong with it? It doesn't make any sense. This is something that should be refused, I believe, because obviously they're using it as a main system. They're not using the drains, period.
Natalie, what's it for? If there's no blockage, why do they need the cesspit?
My understanding is that there has been blockages in the system since the construction work for the care home has begun. The new care home isn't occupied yet. It's not at that point. So it will be from the existing care home. And it relates to the point that the tank is closer to the sewer than the old care home, if that makes sense.
Do we have environmental health objections to this? No, we don't. Do you want to come back, Rochelle?
Yes, if there is no blockages and no one else has had a problem with blockage of that, unless the blockage caused by their own construction, and if they can't justify that, there's no reason for having this other than emergency purposes.
I don't see that's a planning matter.
It's not an emergency.
I don't see that's a planning matter. Why do you have to justify putting in the cesspit? Carl, please.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions. While recognising that this kind of refers to what's called a backup system, backup solution, are there any planning or legal reasons, besides reasons actually, but any planning or legal reasons that will prevent the applicant, if they so chose, using this tank as their main foul water solution?
My understanding is it's to do with the size of the tank and whether it would be sufficient to serve the whole development.
Okay, so
and
yes, but obviously it's not big enough. I mean,
and the drainage details that have been agreed are that it connects to the foul drainage system as well.
Okay, so they couldn't do that then, really. They would have to use the foul drainage system.
This is in addition to being connected to the foul drainage system.
Okay. The other question I've got is clearly the kind of where the tanker parking is shown here. It says the proposed location for the tanker. This is on page 240, paragraph 13. Proposed location for the tanker once works are complete is set back from the junction. But clearly, when works are complete, and I think you've made the point already that works aren't complete. So, is it a planning consideration though that the tanker is parking on the road? I mean, it's obviously a problem, definitely. And if they're covering the smell is going to be a problem. My kids play in the park opposite that sometimes, so I really don't want to stand there with that smell. But it's obviously dangerous. to traffic and pedestrians if it's in actually in the road or on the corner. So, but is that a planning issue? It seems to me in some ways it is, but in some ways it's not. So I'd like that answered.
They've shown the position where the tanker will be to empty the tank, and that's considered acceptable in highway safety terms.
Yeah, I know that, and I think it is safe inside the access road. The problem is that that's not where they're parking at the moment because of the works.
But as you said, the construction work is currently taking place.
So what I'm kind of saying is that a planning, because obviously that's what this planning application is about, is to have the tanker in that place. That's actually specified in this report. So
yeah, and it forms part of the approved plans.
Okay, so they cannot park on that corner with that tanker then, if this application succeeds. I'd be surprised if that was the case, but that seems to be what's been said.
Chris, did you want to add anything?
Hopefully.
Well, I think, to be fair, I think Paul, Paul mentioned that it's been emptied already. I have to admit, I don't know how often it's emptied or why it's being emptied if the site isn't in occupation because it's being constructed. But I think the issue is I don't believe the vehicle is parking on the main carriageway. It's parking in the junction. And obviously our main concern is once construction's finished and the site is operation, it will be set further back in its correct location. I'm not understanding that I don't believe it's causing an issue now. I guess I understand that would be an issue once it's occupied and there's more people using the route. But for now, it's yes, it's not ideal. And obviously you shouldn't, in terms of the highway code, park within 10 metres of a junction. So ideally it should be set back anyway to not cause an issue, but it's not being heavily used at this moment in time. It's not deemed that it would cause an issue. And once consented and operational, it will be set back as part of the condition that this scheme was consented or does consent if it's granted.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Andrea. Sorry, Gary first.
Yeah, thanks.
It's getting late.
Yeah, thank you. I note that there haven't been any objections from highways or from drainage or environmental health, but I do treat the concerns of ward members, their concerns about road safety and smell when the cesspit is being emptied, very, very seriously indeed. I'm still not clear though, is that a material consideration for us tonight? So if that could be clarified firstly, please. And then I'm also not clear as to the reasons why the cesspit apparently has already had to be emptied a number more, certainly more than once, according to to the documents pack. Is this because the existing care home is continuing to operate, and is the expectation that once that care home is vacated, that the cesspit will truly only be used as an emergency backup? Because I think that would change, if that was the case, I think that would change the calculus quite significantly. And then the final question is, and again, this may not be a planning consideration, so I'm sorry, if I'm raising something that's not, but I am concerned what the immediate consequences for the disposal of effluent would be, if the application was refused and the cesspit could no longer be used, even as an emergency backup.
Just to provide some clarification, the existing care home that's at the site has 88 bedrooms. The care home, which is phase 1, which is currently under construction, has 45 bedrooms. So the 88 bedroom care home is still operational. And there has been, my understanding from talking to the agent is that there has been blockages whilst construction has been undertaken for that new care home. Sorry, you're going to just have to repeat what your other couple of queries were, sorry.
Yeah. The other query, I suppose, about the disposal of the effluent, what would be the practical consequences, if the application was refused and it resulted in the cesspit no longer being allowed, to be used.
Shall I come back out on that point first?
Yeah.
My understanding is that there would be overspill from the manholes if that was to occur, but it's to do with the relationship of where the new building is in relation to the sewer system, and why I think it's become needed to have this additional level in addition to the foul drainage network.
And the intention really from the outset was, to treat this really as an emergency backup. And that the expectation is still that once the building works are completed, that that emergency backup would be exactly that, and not required to be used as regularly as it seems to be during this construction phase.
It would be used when there's blockages in the system, but as I've just said about the numbers of the bedrooms for the first phase, that's a lot lower than the number of bedrooms that are currently on site.
Thank you. Yeah. Gary.
Thank you. The simple question has really been alluded to by others is, why is there no connection directly to the main sewer? I understand the need for this in the middle of the New Forest, but not in the middle of an established urban area where everyone is connected directly to main drain systems. It's a third world solution. And I think we've lost the plot if we want to subject major development to a septic tank solution. The scheme is for 45 bedrooms and 6 assisted living spaces, which are not occupied as yet. So therefore, they have no impact on the sewer system, working the sewage system at the moment. So one might have to look at the other 88 properties that are there, and perhaps there's a sewage problem with them. But the solution for them is not to put in a septic tank for the new properties. I mean, what a message to send to local residents and the parish council and the ward members. In my opinion, to approve this will show the borough council and the planning committee as out of touch with the modern world, and really a laughingstock in the eyes of the public. I mean, technology has moved well ahead, and if we start to approve planning permission in urban areas that require septic tanks for them to function, we've got it wrong. It's got to be connected to the old care home. I mean, as I said, there's 46, I think, bullet points from residents objecting. There's 2 ward members who objected, and there's a 3rd ward member here who objected. So it's pretty obvious that there are serious problems here. But I think the problems are maybe of the development. Why, if we allow buildings that have to have septic tanks to enable them to operate, with all the smell and the issues that come with them, we're doing the wrong thing. And had I been there, I would most definitely vote against it. It's definitely very, very wrong to put septic tanks into urban sewage systems or sewage systems in urban areas. It's for the countryside. Thank you.
Well, it might well be wrong, but we're here to decide whether this conforms to planning law. That's the question. I can't for the life of me see what here is. I mean, there may be problems with environmental health, but I can't see how this does not conform to planning policy. If someone can tell me, I'd be grateful. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a lot of sympathy with what Gary said about this being a strange solution for a modern development in an urban setting. I take your point entirely, that we have to assess what's before us. But there does seem to be, on the evidence of the local members, demonstrable harm in terms of smell for neighbouring residents. And I have a lot of sympathy with opposing the application on that basis. However, the problem we have, as far as I can see, is environmental health, while the technical experts have not raised an objection on that basis. So I'm not quite sure where we can go here. This is, to me, a very unfortunate situation we've got ourselves into. And I think I find it remarkable, as Gary does, that this is thought to be the solution in a modern development in an urban area. And I really wish we could find a way of mitigating the smell impact for local residents.
Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just get my mind clear about this? My understanding from this application is that everything is going to be connected to the mains drain, and that the only reason they need the septic tank is if the mains drain blocks. Is that?
But clearly that's not happening at the moment.
Can I finish? So I've worked in a building in the near past where we had building work, and for 2 years we had problems with the drains backing up into the facilities, because the builders put all sorts of stuff down the drains that they shouldn't have and blocked them up. So although I don't think we should be having septic tanks in areas like this, I would hope that the issue with the drains blocking is transient when the building work is going on. So I'd like some reassurance on that from officers as to how we make sure it isn't a permanent feature. And then I'd also like to know if it did perchance become a permanent feature, the capacity of that tank with those amount of houses or rooms all in operation, how long would it operate? How long would it last for? And therefore, how frequently would it have to be emptied? Because my understanding of septic tanks is they smell when you empty them. They don't necessarily smell the rest of the time. So it's being emptied once a year. It's probably not a nuisance. So if it's been emptied 3 times a day, then it is. So if somebody could answer that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, as you say, it is connecting to the existing valve system. If it is triggered that the tank is required, there's an alarm that would be raised, which requires it to be emptied within a 24-hour period. So it wouldn't be sat there for a long period of time. Then did you want to know the size of the tank and about capacity?
What I wanted to know was how long the tank would last if all those rooms were in operation and the drain was blocked.
I'm not sure I've got that information to hand.
Okay. Rochelle, want to come back?
There's a very nice hotel going down at Nirvana, which is going to be very exclusive, but they don't seem to think they need a sewage a cesspit. And I think that's a little bit fancier than the care home, personally. And I have a feeling that they don't want to see. If they don't need one, why do these people need one for something that isn't a problem? And as Pauline says, well, it's maybe people putting things down the drain. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but if you have construction people putting things down the drain, you should fire them, and or make them pay to get the sewage clean. Now, has Thames Water actually checked the sewage to make sure that it's actually blocked? And if so, what are they doing to clean the sewage then instead of using the cesspit? I don't understand this. There doesn't seem to be a reason for having this thing, and it seems to be in use for no reason at all. We don't know.
Okay, does anyone want to propose an alternative? Cobbs.
I don't want to propose an alternative. I just want to speak quickly. A couple of things. The 2 paragraphs, 17 and 18, residential amenities, they just seem a bit strange to me. This is where the environmental health officer has commented. That refers to it as a sensible approach as an emergency backup, which I kind of agree with. And then the next paragraph talks about frequent emptying will have potential for nuisance. Blockages appear to be an existing issue. And then later down it says the EHO suggested a temporary permission to encourage a longer term solution. So there's an implication here that there's a problem, I think. But then it goes on to say it's not considered a reasonable condition. So I'm just interested to know why that's not a reasonable condition. I mean, it seems, to be fair, what I actually think here is this is a valid application for a backup that's not actually going to be used as a backup. That's how it looks to me. But in planning terms, how do we say no? That's my view. You know, I'm thinking, how would we say no to it? And I can't find an answer, really. I'd like to find one.
We've got an answer to Carl's point.
So, Chair, would you mind if I just jumped in quickly?
Yes, please.
I think it's quite unlikely that an applicant's consider this would be their preferred method of disposal, and so it's circumstances that have dictated it because of the issues, which hopefully are temporary. But if they don't have this solution, then members are minded to refuse the application, and we make them take this backup system out, then I'm not sure what we'd expect would happen, other than worse problems than if the solution was in place. So I think I'd strongly say that really we need to consider the application that we've got in front of us, and it is, we know, intended to be a backup measure, and I think really any harm from collection or from smell is very limited in its time and its duration, and I think really we should go with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Rochelle, do you?
I would like to have this deferred until the next thing, have Thames Water actually check the problem and fix the problem first. And so they may not even need this.
So I think Thames Water have commented they've got no objection. I mean, we could defer this for months / years if you want to wait for Thames Water to solve the problem. This is a backup cause that the application is here because of the problems with Thames Water.
We don't know there is a problem with Thames Water. Thames Water hasn't said they have a problem.
We do know there's a problem with Thames Water. They've said.
Why is it only happening here?
We know there was a problem because Thames Water told us there was when the planning application was approved.
But why only there?
Pauline.
Thank you. I was going to suggest an alternative proposal for deferral, actually, which was to get an answer to. So let me start again. The reason this causes a nuisance is because of frequent emptying, which therefore causes a smell. So because when the drain is blocked, we don't know how frequently it will have to be emptied. We don't know whether that's a nuisance or not. So therefore, I would suggest possibly a deferral until we work out until somebody tells us how frequently it would have to be emptied if it was in use, so that we know whether it's actually a nuisance or not. Because if it's 5 times a day, it is definitely a nuisance. If it's once every 6 months, it probably isn't. I think that might just give us a bit more information. But I was also very, very interested to hear the comment just a minute ago that Thames Water told us it would be a problem when this was approved, because I don't think we've heard that before.
Okay. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Momentarily, I thought you'd forgotten me. I thought I was on the verge of speaking when I had the opportunity taken away from me. What we've heard recently is some confirmation that this is thought to be a temporary problem associated with the building work. And Justin said just literally a few moments ago, hopefully this is a temporary state of affairs. We've also heard from Carl that there was a suggestion made, I can't recall by who, that this could be a temporary permission. Would that not be the solution here? Because if this is entirely about the building works and the problems caused by it, and if it is not going to be a problem once the construction is completed and the new properties occupied, then we don't need this as a permanent solution. Is there not any scope for us approving this on a temporary basis until such time as the new properties are occupied, and presumably then the main sewage system will be working?
Well, there's clearly problems that need to be sorted out here, but I mean, can I ask the officers, is this a planning matter or not? You don't just, you get a planning application in which matters bit odd and need to fix things here and there. But if they're not planning matters, that's not a good reason for refusing or for deferring. I can take advice, please, from the officers.
Actually suggesting, Chair, either refusing or deferring, I was suggesting making this a temporary permission.
All right, various things. The MPPF says we should approve things if there's nothing wrong with them. So can we?
Yeah, there's a couple of issues. I think it's worse because of the current situation, because of the construction works, but also when the permission was granted, Thames Water raised an issue with capacity. So there is a short-term problem, which should get better as the site develops, because it's a smaller care home than existing, so presumably less strain on the system. There is a longer-term issue, which is a Thames Water one. And we couldn't tell you how long that would take to resolve. But, you know, theoretically, once the site is operational and building works are finished, then any emptying should be less frequent.
How frequent?
I've got about three. I'm sorry if I missed you, and Andrew got to speak as well. Do you?
Yeah, I'm very concerned now to hear that Thames Water raised concerns about the capacity when the planning application was being considered. I hadn't actually picked that up in my reading, of the documents, and that actually has an impact on what I was going to suggest, what was exactly what Stephen suggested, granting of temporary permission, but if there is a longer term problem as well, as this short term problem, I don't know what the solution is. I'm really sorry.
Okay. So we need a.
This was this was Thames Water's suggestion. This system, so that is why we have this in front of us. So I appreciate what you're saying about being concerned about the longer term issue, but this is Thames Water's proposed solution to the problem.
It theoretically provides kind of almost an insurance for their asset, and it's not uncommon when new developments come on board that Thames haven't actually caught up and perhaps upgraded their foul pumping station or facilities to accommodate the new demand that's coming. And it's quite often that developers, when they're constructing sites, they put in oversized foul pipes, which allow, with obviously a higher infall and outfall, to allow for some storage to take place. So it reaches the foul pumping station at a slower rate, and the storage held within the pipes on its approach. I see this as a very similar approach, but it's been done by the developer on their site rather than being done perhaps in a carriageway. Digging up a carriageway and putting in an oversized pipe to help storage on approach to the Thames network.
Gary, I think you want to go.
Yeah, thank you. Page 241, paragraph 15 says Thames Water have no comment to make on the application, and in 16 it says a capacity concern has not been raised by Thames Water or the council drainage engineer. Yet on the previous page in paragraph 7 and 8, paragraph 7 says a pre-occupational condition to ensure that either all wastewater network upgrades required to accommodate the additional flows from the development have been completed. And the point that was made just there was that let's not dig up the road and put in a bigger pipe so the sewerage system can accommodate that, and maybe that's the solution. So it's very clear that, Justin did say, oh, Thames Water do have an issue, but it's not reported in the report that there's an issue. And the reality is that there really needs to be a solution to this with the connection to the main sewerage, and it should not be a third word solution, which this clearly is. Thank you.
Rebecca.
I genuinely feel concerned about this, Chair, because I'm struggling to understand with what we're actually being asked to do here, because, just looking at this as we're being asked to do, there's been so many changes within the last 10 minutes and information that isn't in here, with them being told. So I'm finding it confusing to try and make a balanced decision here based on we're being asked to approve for something that is used in an emergency, but it's already actually currently being used. So I'm struggling a little bit with the decision that we have to, what we're actually being asked here.
Yeah. We have about 8 minutes. Carl.
Okay, I'll be very quick because I just want to say, you know, I'm sure we all do this. We write little notes on these before we come in, and then we listen to everything that's got to say, make a decision. The last thing I wrote on my notes is, I don't know what to think on this one. And that's exactly where I am after half an hour of us discussing it.
Okay, does anyone wish to propose? I know we have done, Stephen.
The reason I wish to return to that temporary permission is it would actually give an opportunity for Thames Water to try and find a more viable long-term solution. If we gave a temporary planning permission, we don't necessarily need to specify a time until such time as the new development is completed and occupied. And then we would be in the position where we could then see whether Thames Water had found a permanent solution to this that didn't involve a cesspit, but involved proper linkage with the mains sewerage system. And if they hadn't, we would have to consider again whether we'd want to offer a further extension of a temporary permission or would want to accept this as the permanent solution. But we have an opportunity here, I think, to try and encourage Thames Water to actually progress a solution. If we just give permission to this, I don't think we give them any incentive to do anything other than just say this is now the acceptable solution. So I would like to persist with the proposal that we actually propose a temporary planning permission until such time as Lord Harris Court new development is occupied. And then the committee would have the opportunity to review the situation.
Okay, I mean, normally with a temporary one at the end of the period, the thing drops and there's no permission for trying to coordinate it. But ask the officers.
Currently, there isn't any permission.
Yes.
This is retrospective. Yes. It would remain retrospective. We would be assessing it in the same way as we are now. So I don't see that as a fundamental problem.
Okay, that's fine, Stephen. Let me just check with the officers. Is that can that be engineered?
Yeah, I think that's possible to do. I think the end date, i.e. occupation, is probably a bit too tight. It might have to be 6-12 months, say, after final occupation, after which time it's reviewed. But it's theoretically possible. Yeah,
that's fine for me. I'm quite happy to accept that.
Great. Have a second of that? Pauline? Pauline, did you want to speak, Pauline?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with the proposal, but I am a little bit concerned that during the course of this discussion, we've been told at one stage that it was all down to temporary issues in the building work, and now when we get partway through the discussion, we found out there's a fundamental problem with the design that Thames Water told us about when the application was approved. It doesn't make it very easy to make a decision.
Pauline, sorry, that this isn't new information. Paragraph 7 of the report says Thames Water identified a current inability of the existing network. But there are two issues.
Then it's contradictory, because we were clearly told that it was a temporary problem. If it's a Thames Water current inability of the existing foul water network to accommodate the needs of development, that is not temporary until they fix it.
No, sorry, made worse by the existing construction issues.
We have a proposal, Chairman, and I'm very conscious that we've not that many minutes left.
I'm also very conscious of that. I'm also conscious that members seem to be rather confused. I'm rather confused too. I'm just wondering whether perhaps a deferral to get more coherent explanation from the officers.
I'm not convinced we'll get the information that would satisfy you. So perhaps a temporary permission is the best solution in the circumstances.
I think we've had, as near we're going to get an endorsement from Justin that this may be a viable way forward. So may I suggest we persist with my proposal rather than go for deferral?
Yes, well, it's up to members in the end. And Pauline seconded, didn't it? So
Yeah.
we'll.
Justin, can I just get clarification from you? You mentioned a period of time after occupation. Have you got a number of months?
Yeah,
in mind?
I'd suggested 6 or 12 months. I mean, 12 months may be sufficient time to for the applicant to have further discussions with Thames Water if members are happy with that.
Stephen, you happy with it?
I'm not sure what we're proposing here. Is it 6 or 12? There seems to be a bidding war here.
You're in charge.
Six seems to be the preferred option. I think we should try and live with 6 if we can.
Yep, well, you can propose what you like. Happy with that, Pauline? Right, we'll get to the votes in the nick of time. I think. Those in favour of that? Right, any against? It's 8-0. And it's 2.5 minutes to 11. Well, we haven't quite finished the meeting. Justin, are you going to say something about, there is actually, contrary to the what I've got here, we do have a preemptive site visit.
There is indeed, sorry, a site visit contrary to what it says. The Shinfield Studios application, which I think Callum has already sent separate correspondence out on.
Thank you. Does anyone want to say anything about, we've got good appeal results again. Just the last one wasn't successful, all the others were, so well done again to the officers. I think with that, we'll close the meeting now. Thank you very much for a rather long evening. Thank you and good night.